All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos, and I am here with the author, special guest of Tucker Carlson, the Rachel Wilson. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great. Again, congratulations. I saw you on Fox News on Tucker Carlson talking about homeschooling. You did a great job on your segment.
Thank you. I'm happy to shill for homeschooling and motherhood any chance I get. So it was a really cool opportunity to get in front of a whole bunch of people and say, hey, it's not only okay to stay home with your kids and homeschool them, but it's awesome and you should do it. It's the new cool thing. All the cool kids are staying home and homeschooling.
Absolutely.
So don't have a stupid career. Be a mom. It's way more fun.
It's definitely the way to go, and with the degeneracy and with that's what we're going to be getting into with the sort of state of the contemporary world. You'd have to be a fool at this point to let other people raise your children, because it's going to, again, as I guess traditional Christians, going to lead them in the opposite direction that we would want to steer our youngsters towards. And so I asked you to come on tonight to talk about your book, Occult Feminism, The Secret History of Women's Liberation. And so we're going to be diving into it. It's a really good read. It does a great job of sort of chronologically moving through the developments, or at least the ideas of sort of feminine liberation and where exactly those start. So we're going to get into witchcraft and goddess worship and Lilith and all that different stuff. But just to begin, maybe just introduce yourself for those who may not. I'm sure the majority of people are already familiar with you. But then what prompted you to want to write this book?
Sure. So I'm nobody special or important. I'm just a stay-at-home mom of 5 awesome kids. I'm out in the rural Midwest, out in God's country, enjoying nature all the time and being a mom. And the reason that I wrote the book really was because I was always kind of in like gifted programs and stuff growing up, and was on this academic track, thought I was going to do something with like maybe microbiology or medicine or something like that, decided not to do it, and had my first daughter when I was only 20. And I just didn't want to do anything else besides be a mom after that. Nothing else seemed that important. And I felt like I was I felt like the only fish swimming upstream because everybody else around me, I mean, the feedback I got from friends, close friends, family, neighbors, coworkers was like, well, you're just going to stay home? Like, what a waste. You're so smart. You're so talented. You should have a career. I can't believe you're going to give all that up just to babysit all day. That was the attitude. And to me, I was like, what? It seems so opposite. And so it was hard on me. Like, honestly, emotionally, it was really hard because I felt really unsupported. Even family and stuff going, well, you really should be working. And, then I kept having kids because I loved having kids. And it was like, why are you having so many kids? Why are you doing that? And people would go, haven't you figured out why that keeps happening yet? Have you figured out why you keep getting pregnant? It was just like, why am I being shamed for wanting to be a mom, wanting to be a good mom? And so I started just kind of like arguing with people a little bit about feminism, and that from my perspective, it sucked. And I thought it was stupid and I didn't think it worked very well. And I would point these things out. I started doing some debates with people online about it and was kind of successful doing that. And one of my friends was like, you really need to write a book. Because you lay it out so good when you're talking, but like, we need this written down or something. Like, you should lay it out for everybody. And I thought, okay, well, I could do that. And it would be kind of cool to do in my spare time. And I thought it was going to be more of a book about the financial aspect of like who backed feminism and who was funding it, which that is in the book. There is some of that in there too. But when I started digging in and doing the research, because I knew if I was going to write a book that was just completely denouncing feminism, that everybody online was going to come for me. Every feminist academic was going to come for me. So you better have citations. You better know what you're talking about. You better be able to back it up.
Right.
So I did a lot of research before I even started writing. And what I kept finding was this common thread of occultism.
Yeah.
among, especially in like the earliest, like the suffragettes and stuff, the earliest
Yep.
modern um, feminism stuff. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Nobody ever told me that some of the very first witch coven that was legally established in the United States was named after Susan B. Anthony. They didn't tell me that in school. And they didn't tell me, you know, that Margaret Sanger was off in Europe doing occult orgies with like, you know, H.G. Wells and Havelock Ellis and all these other prominent. And I'm just going, I'm constantly going to my husband, baby, did you know this? And he's like, what? No way. And so we talk about it. And I'm like, I think this has to be the book. The book has to be about where this ideology really comes from.
Right.
Because what we all know, what we've all been told about it, you know, is like women were super oppressed and they couldn't do anything. They couldn't leave the house. They couldn't get out of abusive marriages, and they were chained to a stove, and they were forced to give birth until they died. And that was history until the 19th Amendment. And then the 19th Amendment came along and it rescued women and it saved them. And thank God for that, because you wouldn't even be able to talk on the internet if it wasn't for feminism, right?
Right.
And I also found out that that's all a bunch of baloney and lies, and that was never history. And I thought, when did this change? Well, when it changed was in the 60s and 70s, when gender studies and women's studies became an official discipline.
Right.
Well, guess who's the people who are going to become a professor in that discipline? Only people who are already radical feminists.
Right.
And what they did, this is mentioned in the book, they took the history we had and changed it. So all the written history we had about women's history was kind of discarded and thrown away, or kind of like hidden, pushed to the sides, and it was rewritten, and all of the mainstream stuff comes from these universities, these professors, these extreme like Marxist feminist academics. And their excuse is, well, that history isn't the real history because it's not from the standpoint of feminine, you know, women who were subjugated and unfairly oppressed.
Right.
And they call it standpoint feminism. So they're like, no, that's not the truth. Our truth is the truth. You know, we hear this all the time. So I was like, no, people need to know where this really comes from. They need to know the real history. They need to know that there was not this vicious patriarchy that all men, you know, men who have daughters, sisters, mothers, grandmothers that they love, that these men were not just brutalizing and oppressing us throughout all of history and just, you know, forcing us into arranged marriages and forcing us to give birth until we either died from that or from birth death or something.
Right.
But I mean, that's what we're all told. So it was just like, I've got to set the record straight and have this written down so that my 4 daughters and everybody who comes after them, that there's at least one opposing voice saying, no, that's not exactly how this went. And here's where feminism really comes from.
So I have a few things that I want to get into to generally lay the premise before we even start moving through the book. And maybe the best place to start then is the concept of female liberation and what they're being liberated from, at least in regards to some of these spiritual traditions. So let's just focus on this sort of occult roots here for a minute. And so we can dive into entities like Lilith and the mythology regarding Lilith, or how we understand who Lilith is in opposition to Eve. And that is in a dialectical relationship to Adam and patriarchy and order and all this different stuff, because I want to get into a concept called the disenchantment, which comes from Max Weber, where he believes the rationalization process itself, which is moving from archaic shamanic traditions, tribal traditions, as it becomes more rationalized and cults turn into religions and religions turn into priesthoods, that this process eventually leads to what he considers the Protestant Reformation, where the world becomes totally disenchanted and mysticism is totally taken out of Christianity. And because of the absence of that mystical element, people have to go about re-enchanting the world. And so some of my academic research is tied to looking at the disenchantment and the rise of occultism in the Western esoteric tradition, specifically within Northern Europe, i.e. Protestant Europe, and how because of the lack of mysticism and the rationalized theology of Protestantism, people find the mysticism over within the magic. And so I think that there's even now then when we look at modern feminism and this idea of liberation or sexual promiscuity, it's a way to re-enchant the world through one's personal meaning and personal experience. Now, obviously, this is going to be in opposition to a traditional Christian worldview. So let's then begin that framework, because I think that's a good framework for this whole conversation. Is when you've done your research and you looked in, and again, in chapter 1 and 2 really starts to dive into this. Who is Lilith? What is the idea of these ancient understandings of female liberation? When we look at the witch themselves, we see a lot, and so I'm sure you agree that some of the inquisitional accusations may have been over-exaggerated. But at the same time, the contemporary scholars who are feminists, who are witches, who are part of the Wicca or whatever coven, they promote this stuff. So they say, yo, absolutely, we knew what herbal substances to use for the inebriation of conscience. Of course we were engaging in full moon orgiastic activity. Like, that's part of our tradition. That's part of the liberation. That's part of the confinements of the patriarchal tradition. And so let's begin there then. Speak to me about Lilith and what you saw, this beginning occultic root of what is female liberation and how is that tied to the goddesses and female worship?
Yeah, sure. So feminism itself is at its core a complete opposition to God the Father. Christianity, especially true Orthodox Christianity, is indeed a patriarchal religion. Now, I want to take the patriarchy, that word, patriarchy, I want to take it back because it's been turned into something it never was and something that it isn't, which is like this horrific, this oppressed narrative nonsense that we have now in the West. But Christianity is a patriarchal tradition.
Right.
So going back to the pagans in Rome who were opposed to Christianity, you know, they had temple prostitutes, they had goddesses that they worshipped. They did all this orgiastic stuff. And we even had the development of Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism after the advent of Christianity. And that's when we start to see like the Lilith myth being developed more and more.
As a figure to sort of reinterpret a new hermeneutical lens to look at Scripture, even though she's not there in our canonical Scripture, to then say, look, you guys don't have the full truth. We have the esoteric full truth, and it's tied to a whole theology of ritual magic.
Yes, so Lilith is like the cool one, right? She's the hero. They turned her into the hero. It's like, she wasn't going to be the one underneath Adam. Like the myth starts with Adam wanted to be on top, you know, and she didn't like that. She wasn't going to put up with that. So she took off, and angels came to her telling her, look, you got to come back. God's angry. He's going to destroy you if you don't come back. And she said, no, I'm not going to submit to this man. You can't make me. And she basically struck a deal with the angels where she had to kill a large number of infants every day until the end of time in order to be allowed to live in separation in the ocean or over the waters, I guess, is the actual text, which is interesting to me, given what we know about Genesis and everything. But she hovers over the waters and she's in the waters and she has to kill a certain number of infants. And then we get myths coming out of that where you would put talismans on babies, or you would put ritual stuff on the crib to protect them. And with the Lilith myth, we see the development of things like demonic entities like succubi that will take men in their sleep and impregnate themselves, and they would have the same kind of rituals to protect against that. So it was like they weren't happy with the Eve story, especially with the Theotokos being the new Eve.
Yeah, the redemptive arc of that tradition.
Redeeming humanity, yes. And she redeemed humanity through motherhood.
Right.
Through purity,
exactly.
through her seed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so they wanted like an inverted version of that story so that they could keep doing I guess they like their full moon orgies and they liked their temple prostitutes and those sort of things. You know, it's a harder sell to tell people you have to be chaste and pure and resist vice and sin. So let's use
that then to get into the role of sexuality, because that is part of this whole the occultic relationship to this female liberative spirit. Even again in the contemporary writers, they're going to emphasize this and look to the 1960s counterculture and the sexual revolution as kind of going back to this yearning, this spirit that's been stamped out by the evil patriarchy, but is really the full birthright of women. And I can't help but think that, again, female sexuality is so powerful. It's powerful, one, that obviously it's women that carry the children, but men, we're kind of just dumb animals to some degree. And so we can really be influenced by the power of female sexuality. And so we've seen really the exoteric process of the occultism occurring in our society, where occultism is now the dominant theme. And modern scholars have talked about what they call occulturism, where our culture is literally becoming the occult. Now, they're in favor of this, but we see this happening right now. You look to the music videos, you look to Beyonce, or again, the female goddess archetypes now that are being put in front of us. And it's through sexuality that their magic, that their power is influencing the masses. And so female sexuality doesn't just affect men, but it also affects women.
Yes.
And so speak to a little bit like this role. What is the female sexuality orgies, that this is the real power of this occultic spirit of the power of women is tied to their sexuality?
Yeah. So if you like, Terence McKenna loved to talk about how really the way we should be doing it is the way the ancients did it, where we have these full moon orgies where nobody's paternity can really be established. Nobody's sure who their dad is. And that takes a lot of power away from men.
Right.
You can't create dynasties. You can't hand down legacies or anything like that. And it still wasn't a matriarchal culture, but it was a lot closer.
Right.
There was more female power through sexuality that way. And that got carried forward throughout the ages. Anytime anybody wanted to rebel, that's what women have, right? We're not going to have brute strength power over men. We're not even going to have political power or anything like that until first wave, which we'll get into.
We'll get there.
Everybody goes easy on first wave, and I think it's the worst of all three.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah.
Yes. Everybody likes to go, well, first wave was fine, but they really got carried away. And it's like, no. First wave was worse than you can ever imagine, and I'll tell you why. But the female sexual power it's a spell, for lack of a better word.
Right.
If you want to cast a spell over a man, you can look at all kinds of different archetypal stories throughout history where women seduced men in order to thwart them, gain power, help their enemies, and things like that.
Right.
So, what do we see now in pop culture? Like you mentioned Beyonce and stuff. We've got Cardi B, we've got Taylor Swift, right? It's always trashing men, or it's like there's this new trend in rap, which is like, it's very cool now to pretend as a woman that you're into the most violent sex acts.
Right. That
you like being brutalized, or you like brutalizing somebody, these kind of fetish type of things. And it's in mainstream pop. It's in songs and videos that are all over the place in the middle of the day on regular radio and on YouTube, anywhere that children can even see them, and nobody bats an eye. It's like, it's become so normal that it's like, yeah, girl, you got to go get yours. Like, that's how you get your power. That's how does Kylie Jenner make more money than any other pop star out there, more than professional athletes, more than Kanye West, more than any of the men, because she's using her sexual power. And it's all an illusion. It is all a spell. If you look at pictures of her before she ever got plastic surgery, they are not even the same human being.
Right.
And then we see that carried even further. So now we've got women getting the fake boobs, the fake lips, the fake everything, these really exaggerated sex characteristics for the purpose of power and seduction and mystifying men and turning their brains into jello so that they can't think. And then you see, strangely, now men are doing that. So you'll see what we might call like weaker or maybe more sexually unsuccessful men transitioning over and saying, well, I'm a lady now. Well, why is that? It's because they know that if they get all these things done, if they get on hormones, they get the fake boobs, they get the fake lips, they wear the wig or get the long hair, And they're never dressed like I am right now, right? They're never dressed like I am when I go to church. They are always dressed like a stripper, a porn star, a seductress, right? It's always this like hypersexual, overly exaggerated version of what femininity is. And it is for the purpose of power. It's and you'll see these people online. If a guy says, you know, I'm against this, I don't like this transgender stuff, I don't think it should be everywhere, they go, oh, you're just mad because you want me, you're confused right now, you know. And it's like they take pleasure in trying to kind of trick you. This is, I mean, who's the father of lies? Where does trickery come from? Where does these spells and illusions come from? So it all goes back to occult magic, but they were doing real actual occult magic with psychedelic substances, with herbal substances, with drugs, with moon cycles and all that. And this stuff, I'm telling you, people ask me, they're like, is this really a problem though? I mean, like, who's doing witchcraft? Oh, honey, you gotta go get on TikTok or Instagram and just scroll a little bit. Like, just do the hashtag witchcraft and do some scrolling, and you will see women watering their houseplants with their period blood, rubbing it on their face. Oh yeah, this is a huge trend. I'm not even kidding. It's very mainstream. Yes, they're reclaiming their feminine power by doing blood rituals with menses, by using breast milk for that sort of thing, using urine for that sort of thing. Using stones and crystals in conjunction with that and with the moon cycles. And some of them, yes, they think it's cute and they're like, I like gardening and rocks. That's true. There's some of that, but some of them are very serious about it.
Right.
I don't think they know like the full power of what they're getting into, but some of them do. And witch covens are becoming really popular and they're seeing a huge resurgence. Wicca is huge. Yeah, this stuff is really popular. My favorite Reddit thread of all time is it's called Witches versus the Patriarchy. Now for me it's comedy, but you guys, if you're like, what is she talking about? Go check that out. Go look at Reddit, go look at TikTok, see what women under 30 are into, and it will like blow your mind if you haven't gotten into that yet.
And so connecting that even back to a historical thread, like as we were talking privately, I've been doing a lot of research into medieval understandings of magic and witchcraft and rituals and Gnosticism and different things regarding not these ritualistic activities. Often it was associated with orgiastic activity, but you can even see with explicit descriptions from things like the Knights Templars, who eventually go to Scotland and form what's called Scottish Freemasonry, the beginning of Freemasonry. And they're urinating on the crucifix. They're using menstrual blood and semen in ritualistic ways, and it's often tied to like fertility cults. And so even the understanding of witchcraft in the Middle Ages, there is always this understanding that they were continuing these ancient traditions regarding the fertility of Diana. And how they were continuing Diana's practices. And so by sort of recuperating, and that's where the sexuality, and this is the paradox, because again, it's not there's an emphasis on fertility, but not on motherhood.
Right.
And so it's very interesting how this stuff plays out, because it's always on sex to one degree or another, but it's not on the nurturing of life. And so there is a sort of anti-life sentiment, but a very, very pro-sexual sentiment, going back to the ancient periods, going back to the mystery religions, going back to the medieval witchcraft. That when you started speaking about the period blood and the urine, I mean, there's, and I'm sure, again, just for the haters, there's a lot of exaggeration regarding the witchcraft, burning of witches and stuff in the medieval age, but there's also points of truth, and as we said, contemporary witches are saying that this is what they did. They're saying that this is who they are.
Yeah, one of the main sources for my medieval witchcraft chapter in the book, her name is Kristen Soleil, and she is a modern witch. She teaches at the New School, which is like an ultra progressive arts college in New York. She does lots of lectures, and she's a second generation practicing witch herself. Mm-hmm. And she says that a lot of the things that witches were burned or persecuted for, the things they were accused of, they did do. Yes, there was probably some hysteria or some
Right.
exaggeration. I think that's true with like anything of that nature.
Even when we talk about the globalists now, so it's like it's the same phenomenon. So there's a lot of like misunderstandings and exaggerations, but also there's like a center of truth that kind of permeates through all this stuff.
Yeah, and the things that witches were really doing, which is the reason that Christians started persecuting them, was, well, number one, they were the midwives. So anybody who was doing midwifery was also the ones who were doing abortions. Abortion was not a medical procedure until the 1950s. And all of history prior to that, if you had an abortion, it was done by a midwife. And they would use certain herbal extracts to do that. And they would use, certain tools and things depending on how far along the pregnancy was. But so they were really doing abortions. There was some evidence that there was some like child sacrifice or child ritual sacrifice stuff going on, some pedophilic type of activity going on. You can find paintings from the Middle Ages of female witches with young girls engaged in certain acts and things like that. And it's actually where the broomstick thing comes from. And this professor talks about that. She says, we used the broomsticks for, sex acts. It was basically, for lack of a better word, used as a dildo. Sorry, everybody. Just some of this stuff's gross. I can't help it. Sorry. Right. Sorry if I offend your ears, but they used it for that. It was used when they would have the female orgies. That's what they would use, and that's where the broomstick thing comes from. They would also take like certain medicines, herbal tinctures, or hallucinogenic drugs and put it on whatever phallic object and use that to enhance the magic ritual. That's what, if you know anything about ritual magic, it's all about like the power of belief and channeling like your energy and your belief into whatever ritual you're doing to make it more powerful. And things like sexual activity always enhance that intensity and that focus. So you'll usually see drugs and sex and body fluids combined in whatever ritual magic, all the way back from ancient times with the goddess worship to the Middle Ages, and then even in the 20th century. So even in the early 20th century, a lot of the early like Victorian feminists, some of them were they were in the Golden Dawn, they were in some of the Freemasonic type of cults, and they would do a lot of this ritual sex magic. And then you even see that carried forward with Crowley, and then Jack Parsons and his girlfriend did a lot of
you can point to John Dee and Edward Kelly, going back to that 16th century in Prague, Renaissance Prague, where the whole development of Enochian magic, the whole leads eventually to Edward Kelly, the con man, convincing John Dee, the erudite, world-renowned magician, that I think actually we need to swap wives. That's what I'm getting from the angels here. And so John Dee had a very beautiful, much younger wife. Edward Kelly, not so much. They switch partners. They have sex. And John Dee, to his grave, said that was one of the worst decisions he ever made. But sex magic, as you said, is very, very important. And when you look into some of the accusations during the Inquisition about witchcraft, some of them are self-proclaimed witches. So this wasn't through torture, that they would actually come forward and say that they had to sacrifice children, specifically below the age of 3. Because this is how they could offer a sort of more pure offering to Satan, or for them Lucifer, because a lot of them was wrapped up in a reinterpretation of who created this world, which is tied to Gnosticism then, because they don't see the creator of this world as necessarily the good God, right? Yeah. So the world was created by the devil, and therefore they're trying to escape this world through any means possible to get back to the pure realm of light. And sometimes they interpreted quite exoterically that they understood that to be Lucifer, and he was the true light bringer. And so they would perform different rituals. And I know, so this gentleman here, who is a self-proclaimed gypsy, Thomas Hatzis, he tries to take umbrage with the broomstick thing, but there's multiple. I mean, the majority of scholarship actually agrees that the broomstick works on multiple different levels that from everything I've seen regarding hallucinatory drugs, the whole flying understanding is that and there's a perfect example of it with a woman in here that I have marked where she was in custody during the Inquisition, and she sort of was going into these like visionary states, and that she was in some type of trance state. And when she came back, she said that she was flying, which showed that somehow the flight legend was these witches self-proclaiming that they were flying, they were traveling, they were, remote viewing and going to different places at different times. But clearly it was tied to some sort of hallucinatory substance. So putting the substances on a broom and having it touch directly on the vulva, this was a way for it to enter into the bloodstream a little bit quicker. So it's so interesting to see the contemporary practices and how what we've been told is the Inquisition was crazy. They were killing for no reason. And then at the same time, they revalidate the same accusations and the same practices in the contemporary
but now
period.
it's cool.
Yeah.
Now it's cool. There's a professor at the University of Stockholm named, it's a Swedish name, but Per Faxnell, P-E-R. And he has a fantastic book. It was actually his PhD thesis, I think, and then he turned it into book form. And it's about how Lucifer was a symbol of liberation for the early suffragists and the feminists of the 19th century, which is exactly what I found. You have to remember that this country was first populated with the most radical of the reformers, because they were trying to escape, even the more sane, like Lutherans and Calvinists in Europe, the Anabaptists, the Puritans, like a lot of the more crazier sects, they were like killing them. So they all came here. And what they did when they came here was, now that they were free to do what they wanted to do with their religious stuff, and they took Christianity and turned it into something it never really was before. And I go into that in the book and how they came to that. But the first thing they did in the early 1800s, when socialism was just starting in Europe, in England, it was starting to get popular there, and this happened there, and then it came to the United States, was they had dozens of breakaway little cults and societies in the 1840s alone. I think there was over 60 of them just in the 1840s, and then many more in the subsequent decades, where they would have the most bizarre ideas about sexuality. Because a lot of them, like John Noyes, he's the founder of the Oneida cult. They call it a community, but it is a cult. Big time cult. He had a very tragic story where he and his wife were not able to have children. She kept having miscarriages or stillbirths, early births, which is very sad. But his way of trying to deal with that, he was a seminary student at the time, and he decided he was going to look into fertility and pregnancy and all that stuff and figure out how it worked based on what information they had at the time. And he decided that it was just this like awful barbaric thing to put women through. And you can kind of understand that, seeing what he went through with his wife. However, he took it to crazy town and decided, well, if I can read the Bible and interpret it for myself, what I get from it is that we're supposed to be making heaven on earth here and now. And if that's the case, we can't have exclusive marriages where women have to have children. We should do a thing where we have communal marriage, and all the men are taught to withhold their seminal fluid. So we all, and we don't want to own each other because that's cruel and that's wrong, and it's not very Marxist, and we're really into socialism in its earliest forms. And so, and it was the time when they were developing the social gospel in Protestantism. And all the equality stuff, and it was leading up to the Civil War, and so the social gospel aspect became really heavily involved. So they took socialism, social gospel, and then like sola scriptura basically, and put them in a little blender and made a little cult. And they ended up with this system where everyone in the community was obligated to sleep with everyone else in the community. And they had the older men train the young girls as they were coming of age, and they had the older women train the young men as they were coming of age, because the thought process was the older men know how to control themselves. So we'll let them teach the young girls. And then the older women are past menopause and can't get pregnant, so they can train the young men. Now, there were lawsuits at the time even. Like, even at the time, people were like, whoa, this is nuts. And they were suing to get family members back out of this cult and things like that. And it eventually got broken up because they were charged with all kinds of crimes, because adultery and polygamy and things like that were not legal. But it was a very feminist theme running through that, where it was like the women should be, they shouldn't be owned by a man.
Right.
They should be free to sleep with all of us, and we shouldn't make them have babies because that's cruel and awful. And they did things like have some of the men do a lot of the domestic chores. And the only way they did have babies, the only way they were allowed, was if the cult leader approved it. You had to be what he considered spiritually pure and physically. This is another thing where you see a lot of eugenics starting to creep into this, which is another theme you find in feminism, this eugenics stuff. That you had to be like physically of a certain, you had to be kind of purebred or whatever in order to be approved to have kids. So we see really nutty stuff coming out of this. And then right after that, we get into the big spiritualism. So we had the first Great Awakening with the nutty Protestant cult of personality stuff, which actually turned into cults. Then everybody got into spiritualism with the Fox sisters and the rapping and the ghost stuff. And the first suffragists all were trance speakers, because you couldn't just get up. Now, you were allowed to do public speaking. You were allowed to publish books. That's a myth that women weren't allowed to talk. They were, but you couldn't get up there and say down with the patriarchy and, free love for everybody. They didn't let you say that.
Right.
So how they got around that was, I think some of them truly believed it. I think a lot of them were like shysters. They were playing everybody for a fool, and they would say that they were in a trance, that they were possessed by anybody from the ghost of Thomas Jefferson to the ghost of Benjamin Franklin or whatever, and they would give their feminist speeches under trance, right? Or they would say that they were channeling spirits. And so many of the early suffragists were spiritualists, and they, there was a lot of seances. There's a saying that I came across where they said, there's hardly a suffragette that hasn't sat at the seance table. So it was very popular. And right after that, we had the Women's Bible, which was another thing that I realized this is a grave Protestant error. You had the Jefferson Bible, right, where he took out all the miracles. You had the Schofield Bible, where he, kind of did the same thing and changed a lot of things. And a lot of people don't know that the suffragettes, Susan B. Anthony's best friend, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and 38 other feminists of the time rewrote the first 5 books of the Bible, but they took out the patriarchy. They took out any reference to anything being Eve's fault. They took out any reference to God, like, really being a him. They kind of made it like gender neutral. And in the introduction, Elizabeth Cady Stanton explains that she doesn't really believe scripture is divine. She thinks that men put their spin on it and things like that, and that, it's used to oppress us. So we have to change Christianity. We have to turn it into social gospel, get rid of the, the mysticism, and we have to get rid of the tradition, and we have to get rid of the patriarchy. And that book was wildly successful. It sold huge numbers. It made a lot of money. They had several printings, and you can still buy it on Amazon today.
Right. So. Well, when you talk about the Protestantism and some of those early personality cults during the first Great Awakening, it's just in my studies of Gnosticism, which is one of the things that I really focus on. It's a reiteration of a lot of the Gnostic heresies, and so one of the most obvious during the medieval times is the Cathars of southern France, but they were the same thing. They were considered the pure ones. They made sure that there was the believers, and then there was those who have been purified, and that you see that same distinction between the in group. The reluctance to have children, the idea that you don't want to trap the light into the world, so they would have sex. They would, at the same time, they'd try to maintain their virginity. There's a lot of ambiguous things, because some of them did claim that they participated in orgiastic activity. Others said that they didn't. But some people inside the groups did try to confirm. Again, that would have that another connection back with the witchcraft. But Gnosticism itself was about not having, not copulating, not having children. So you wanted to engage in sodomy, or oral sex or things of this sort, because and that's where then it led to some of these Gnostic sects okaying homosexuality, because in their justification as true Christians and using sola scriptura, because with the problem with the Catholics are really upset with these Gnostics is that they're rejecting the entire sacramentology of the church itself, the Eucharist, marriage, all this different stuff, that they were rejecting that in favor of this new understanding where basically it's proto-Protestantism. They would take the scripture and they would read it, and then they would reinterpret what all that stuff meant. And therefore, if you understood the correct way, they would live these strangely ascetic lifestyles. But at the same time, in that asceticism, they would engage in these radically unascetic activities, but then they would go back to ascetic lifestyles.
Yeah, and that's another thing you see all through feminism, from the earliest times to right now. I mean, right now, it's super popular to be an antinatalist right now. You're going to kill Mama Earth with all them babies. I get told this online, like, how dare you have 5 kids? What, I can imagine your carbon footprint.
Right.
Look at the damage you're doing to the earth, and it's like human life bad, sexuality bad, bodies bad, which you're right is a very like Gnostic idea. And it leads to this weird tension between wanting to be like ultra pure and ascetic, but also ending up in a place where you're in a weird sex cult doing crazy degenerate stuff at the same time.
Because somehow that's your power over. So, and again, one of this book particularly speaks about this, is that within these dualistic, because the book was trying to say that the authors of that book felt it had to do really with a strict dualism, and as soon as dualism got brought in, and that becomes part of Christian theology, that material, non-material becomes in a dialectical tension, and therefore the body's bad. But at the same time, one of the ways that I escape the confines of the body is then to go through hedonistic pleasure.
Yeah.
And so you see that with the feminist movement, because having babies is bad. Having big families is bad. So fertility and copulation for those purposes are bad, but at the same time, have as much sterile sex, get on birth control, have tons of different sexual partners, and then have that sort of sexual spell as you're talking about. So then you have all the female figures in the culture, all of these sort of priestess, goddess-like archetypes, evoking that sexual dimension as power over other people, but it's not sex for life, it's sex for pleasure.
Yes, and it's sex for power too.
Yes.
So that's another thing that all of the major figures, like the chapter on Margaret Sanger, it like broke my heart and enraged me at the same time. I went through a lot of emotions writing this. I had some nightmares. She had 3 children, Margaret Sanger did. And if you read about her online, if you just go to like a blog or something like that, you'll hear this story that her mother had so many children that she died. They were from this horrible Irish Catholic family where her mother was just forced to breed and breed and breed until her body just gave out, which, by the way, is nonsense. This idea that if you have more than 1 or 2 babies, your body just can't take it. You're just going to fall over and die. But that's what they say. Now, of course, if you go back and find like the death certificate, she died from tuberculosis, which everyone was dying from at the time.
Right.
So it wasn't that she had too many babies. But that's the reason they say that is to justify Margaret Sanger's Planned Parenthood shenanigans, right? That, she watched her mother die from overbirthing. And so that's why she was trying to help people. And she actually had a book she put out that claimed to have the personal letters she had received from over 20,000 women.
Wow.
Now, I might do another book just on this, because everything I read about that, everything I could find, I dug for months through the Sanger archives. All of her stuff is kept pretty meticulously in different universities. You cannot find these letters. And I wrote an email saying, why can't I find any? If there was 20,000 of these letters and, 200 are in this book, which justifies abortion and birth control, why can't we see them? You have every other thing. You have, her grocery receipt from 1918, but you don't have 20,000 letters.
Right.
And they said, well, a lot of them were lost to time. And then the rest of them, we assume that she sent them to doctors at abortion clinics to make them feel better, to encourage them, to make them know that they were doing what was right. So the
not
long
20,000 of them. My gosh, there should be at least just 1,000.
You know how many they have? They have 15.
Oh my gosh.
They have 15. So I think the whole book is bunk. That's what I think. It's just my opinion. I can't prove it yet, but that's what I think. And her whole thing was, it was this idea that motherhood is damaging to your body. It's oppressive to your spirit. You're stuck at home. You're stuck in this life of drudgery. And this, we see all of this now. This is everywhere now. I get this from women all the time. I get emails, I get DMs, you know, of women going, you just want us to be trapped at home and unable to leave bad marriages. And you just want us to be oppressed and unable to have our own financial independence. And they go on and on and on. And this idea that motherhood is this detrimental, oppressive, drudgery, like horrific curse, right? That it will destroy your body. Your body will look bad, and it might even kill you, because childbirth is so dangerous, just so dangerous. And this is where this comes from. I mean, she was the one that popularized it, and she, you know, the powers that be at the time really propped her up. And what you see that she did, she had 3 children of her own. She left her husband and her 3 children when she started to kind of get popular with some of the intellectuals of the time. She got in trouble here and was due in court and was trying to evade court. So she went to Europe for a year. And while she was in Europe, she had multiple affairs with all of the intelligentsia of the time. It was like W.B. Yeats and H.G. Wells and Havelock Ellis, like the who's who of the like progressive occultist.
Yeah, that was the 19th century occult revival.
Yeah, and they all were sleeping together.
Right.
It was her, it was other feminists, and they all had affairs. She let her ex-husband, she just like abandoned him and let him go to prison for her in her stead.
I believe it.
And then divorced him.
I believe it.
And then she dumped her kids in, what do you call them? Boarding schools. And the one daughter, she left her in this weird community of like gypsy, vegan, hippie type of people that had just started up. She left her daughter there, and the daughter actually got very sick and died. And one of her sons never forgave her, because he always believed that if she had been there, that his sister wouldn't have died. And she never again like really recovered her relationship with her sons. One of her sons did grow up to kind of carry on some of her work, because he was left all the money and everything. But for the most part, especially the one son, there was no relationship there. And that's another common thing. All of these very famous feminists abandoned their children. They all got divorces. They all left their families. And that's why, and so they went to spread the message to the rest of the world that your family is oppressing you. Your husband is oppressing you. Your children are oppressing you. These are all chains you have to break free from. It's bad for you. You'll never be happy and you'll never be free until you liberate yourself from this oppression. And that's what you were talking about with Lucifer and the inversion there of thinking that God, the creator, God, our heavenly father, is the bad guy.
Right.
And his creation is the bad thing we all have to escape from. And that Lucifer is the liberator. He is the one who wants you to be free. And that professor wrote a whole PhD thesis on how Lucifer was the great liberator of the Victorian era feminists and the suffragists, both in England and here.
Right.
Yeah, and this is just like a really common theme. Abandon your kids, leave your husband, go have lots of random sex with random dudes, and somehow that will liberate you and bring you happiness.
So one of the things that I feel like is really interesting theory is, again, we talked about the disenchantment, but as Max Weber, he has a book called The Protestant Ethic in the Spirit of Capitalism, where he identifies Protestantism as a sort of necessary prerequisite for a lot of the activity that we're describing right now, because its break with traditionality and its emphasis on rationality sets it apart and into another sphere. And one of the things that I think I want to do a stream more on just disenchantment maybe next week. But you see then Protestantism doesn't really compete because of its absence of sacramentology, which was the sacraments is where the transcendent divinity meets the immanent materiality. So then the sacrament, what is a sacrament? Where are the sacraments? That's where the places where those things meet. And so Protestantism kind of disregards sacramentology to the side, where the sacraments are just symbols. Which then reinforces the dualism, because there's not a point of full blending in between them. So despite whatever criticism one has about the Catholic Church as Orthodox or vice versa, that they both maintain the sacraments, and they're to some degree maintain the mysticism, the mystery of Christianity. Magic itself is based on sacramental understandings. Now, it's not the same thing as a Christian Eucharist, but magic by definition is using material means for transcendent purposes. That magic itself is already sacramental. So as we see Protestantism create this rationalistic understanding, and so Max Weber, he argues in his book that because the absence of things like confession, this is where he talks about the spirit of capitalism, is that then people, they can't just go to the priest, confess their sins, and feel cleansed. Therefore, within Protestantism, there's always this sort of burden of guilt. How does one exercise and get rid of that guilt? Well, he argues that they do it through labor. And so labor and the work ethic and my career and my job and making money becomes a way for the Protestant mind to sort of exercise that guilt, because they don't have a sacramental reality to their church and they don't have a place for confession. And so I can't help but associate then Protestantism as really this necessary precursor to allow all this stuff to occur in our society, because think of Orthodoxy and Catholicism. It's coming out of a pagan era where this stuff that we're talking about, it was already there, but somehow it was able to fend itself off a little bit better. Protestantism hasn't been able to. And so it's like Protestantism competes with other rationalistic systems. It competes with natural science. It competes with Marxist theory of economics. Yeah. It doesn't compete with magic. Orthodoxy or Catholicism is competing with these more mystical, magical, ritualistic forms of experience. Protestantism is another idea. It's a concept. It's a thing up here. And so because it doesn't have that mystical quality, anyways, I say all that to say, as we've talked, what's your opinion on the role of Protestantism in the bringing forth of all this feminism? Because to me, again, I think Weber, and you could criticize the degree to this disenchantment, because he theorized that maybe religion was going to go away, or maybe it wasn't. So clearly religion doesn't go away. Clearly the yearning for the mystical hasn't gone away. But the disenchantment, I think, absolutely, he felt that this capitalism, this rationalizing, was going to cause people to be alienated, which I definitely agree with. He said through that alienation, then people are going to try to find meaning through personal means. That's the individual religion. That's the focus on my truth, my experience. Yes. And so through that alienation, then I'm reclaiming the world. I'm re-enchanting the world through my experience, i.e. drug use, i.e. sexual promiscuity, i.e. magic. And so how much do you think Protestantism has aided in the development of really the growth of occult feminism or occultic ideology as we now, because we're tracing in the book, I think now we're basically into the 19th century. So 19th century, 20th century, in my opinion, I think Protestantism was a necessary prerequisite for it to become normalized to such a degree.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I know you're a Midwesterner, so am I. Yep. I grew up in a rural Midwestern county that is all Dutch Reformed Protestants. There's like practically nothing else there. I knew of Catholicism. I just knew it was terrible and evil and horrible. And everything else was this Dutch Reformed Protestantism. And the culture where I grew up is like very, very clean, very, very pious. I have a cookbook from my great grandma where it's like your first cookbook as a wife, and it says that you should make food that is palatable enough to eat, but not tempting enough that you might overindulge. And it's like, my grandma is still with us. She's turning 96 on April 1st.
God bless her. Many years to her.
And she's wonderful. I mean, she's a wonderful, wonderful lady, but she's up at 5 a.m. She puts her shoes on. She has her house clean. And, all of my dad's family was business owners. They were in government. They were in church consistory. And it was like, you worked and you didn't ever talk about money. You would do things that would kind of display that you had money, but only to a certain extent. You didn't want to be flashy. There was so many rules. And it was very much I remember my dad saying that we couldn't swim on Sundays because that was against the rules, but you could dangle your feet in the pool.
Oh.
Or you couldn't mow your lawn. Would come out and look at you sideways, why are you mowing your lawn on Sunday? And my dad, he went through a phase where he just totally rebelled against all that. He was like, what? Because it was so legalistic. It was so rational and so legalistic. It was purely a legal system of follow the rules and do what you're supposed to do. And, if anybody sees you doing something against the rules, then you're in trouble, but you don't have confession. You don't do any of that. It's just you have to, so that I know the culture you're talking about, and I know how Protestantism can be like that. And I think that what we saw with the spiritualist revival in the late 1800s was historians tend to agree that it was a backlash against the puritanical form of Protestantism, where it was people know, we all know that there is something more than just material reality. Most of us know that.
Right.
There are some who really stick to that and really want to believe that it's just the material, but I don't think it's any coincidence that a lot of people who come to Orthodoxy were in the occult at some point.
Right. Myself included.
Right. And my husband didn't really get into it, but he studied it a lot. There were some Freemasons that kind of tried to recruit him for a while. So he looked into it and started studying some stuff. He was like, whoa. But he knew that stuff was real because he was like, it works. I don't know how it works, but that stuff works.
Right.
Brother Augustine will talk about how, that stuff works.
Yeah,
if you know that magic, if you know there is something to the metaphysical, I think that you have to reject Protestantism and the very legalistic forms of Christianity, because they do get rid of the mysticism. They get rid of the sacraments. They get rid of the saints. They get rid of any notion of theosis. When I try to talk to Protestants in my area about what theosis is, they think it's the worst heresy they've ever heard. You can't be like God. You're a filthy rag. You're horrible. Your desires are terrible, and everything about you is horrible and filthy and awful. So I think there was a big backlash against that. During the spiritualist movement, we see it come back again in the Roaring 20s. The Roaring 20s was another big, we got the 19th Amendment, we had the Flapper Girls. There was this age of decadence before the economic crash in the 30s. And that's when Sanger and Planned Parenthood and birth control and all that came about, because it was really the first wave of women's sexual liberation. We think of that being the 60s, but we had it in the 20s as well. And that's why they needed things like diaphragms and birth control pills and Planned Parenthood.
Yeah.
And it became this everything in the West is this dialectical tension. And it's we don't know any other way to think about things.
Right.
We don't have any other way to conceptualize. So it was this, even within feminism, you had the really ultra pious women who didn't want alcohol or anything like that, who were feminists. And then you had the big sexual liberation women who wanted free love. And that continues to this day, although now piety is all but lost. Since we've had the internet and things like that, it just doesn't exist. And I think, if we hadn't had Protestantism, people would still believe in things like Orthodoxy. Catholicism might be more influential, because they've even really neutered Roman Catholic churches to the point that they're meaningless. And so people go looking for something else. And this is something you'll see a lot too in women who get into witchcraft, younger women. It's a huge draw for younger women. And that's one of the reasons I wrote this book, because I see these girls in their early 20s, late teens, and they'll say, I came from a fundamentalist Baptist background, or I came from this really strict pious background, and I felt oppressed. I felt repressed. Sometimes there's even abuse that happens in those situations. And so they go looking elsewhere. And what the occult, and especially like Dianic Wicca, you were talking about the goddess Diana. Dianic Wicca is the largest sect that's female only. Yep. And so women who feel that, women who come from those backgrounds, they're really attracted to it because it tells you you can have, do you feel helpless? Do you feel like a victim? You can have power.
Right.
Come to us and we will show you how to have power through your sexuality. We'll show you how to reclaim your true womanhood and your true fertility and things like that. But again, do we see witches having 10 kids? No, we don't.
I want to focus then on that power, because I think this is going to be a good bridge to bring this conversation into the latter half of the 20th century. Is in your book, you talked about the sort of concept of monism. Now, I obviously, as we've talked about, think that there's a serious form of dualism, and this Hegelian dialectic then of the thesis, antithesis, and then bringing it into a synthesis is that the thesis is that women have been oppressed, so we need to privilege and over-exaggerate for the female. Antithesis then means we need to suppress the masculine. Synthesis then is a sort of blending of male and female into one thing. And so you look at the tantric rites or some of these more mystical forms of Hinduism, and you see the lingam and the yoni. And so the lingam is that male aspect of Shiva, and the yoni, that female vulvic form, where then the fecundity, the fertility, the creative spirit is right there. So the witch, the Wiccan, the empowered female is not using the fertility to become a mother. They're using the fertility to create new things through the rituals, through magic, to exert power. They're sublimating female creative powers for the life of something else, for their own will, for goals, for different attributes. And so when we look then at the riding on brooms, we see then the witch having both the phallus, which she's literally holding as she's flying through the air, but also she's a female. And so there's this, again, you see this same thing. And so then when we look forward or look at our culture right now, we can see this, whether it be Cardi B, it's like this over-sexualization, but at the same time, it's so dominating. It's very masculine form of feminism. And it's so like, it's so overly sexual, but at the same time, it wants to dominate you as a man. And this then, to me, goes where you see the exaggeration, the nails, the makeup, the accessories, and then you can't see a difference between that and the transgender man. Because it's so overly exaggerated, it builds like this cover for both now the feminized man and the masculinized woman come together, and the imagery, the outer appearance is the same. And so this unification, this synthesis, this emphasis on monism, which is really then globalism, it is the one world, it is the global village, it is the Great Reset to some degree. It all kind of feeds onto each other. And so instead of maintaining the separateness of male and female, this empowerment, this focus on Diana, this focus on fertility and all these ancient fertility rites, it's interested in fertility not for life, but for power, for will to manifest the things at once. So speak a little bit to then this blending of opposites, this masculine femininity and this understanding of power.
Yeah. So there's a really interesting little tidbit. If you guys know anything about Gloria Steinem, she was recruited into the CIA straight out of Smith College, which was one of the first big feminist women's colleges. And if you look at their roster, that's where most of the big second wave feminists came from. She was recruited into the CIA, into their Congress for Cultural Freedom, which if you've ever looked into that a little bit, it was like a Cold War propaganda thing to promote certain things into the culture, not only here, but in places like Europe and India. And the very first issue of Ms. Magazine that was ever published, with Gloria Steinem as the editor-in-chief, and she had financial backing from Clay Felker, who was a CIA agent. This is the cover. I don't know if you can see the picture there. Mm-hmm. That is the goddess Kali. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You probably are pretty familiar with her. She's usually depicted standing on Shiva.
Yep.
her male counterpart, and she's a bloodthirsty like war goddess, and she's a big feminist hero. And it's like, what? I mean, come on, if you're going to sell a magazine to housewives in the late 60s, early 70s, why the heck would you put a blue-skinned, six-armed Hindu goddess on the cover?
Right.
It's really weird. But if you know what's behind all of this, it makes perfect sense why you would do that. And she spent time in India for a couple of years working for the CIA and things like that. And you will find that thread. You'll find CIA involvement in all of this stuff as well, just like you do with a lot of the stuff that Jay talks about and things like that. So this is like the underlying ideology beneath all of it. And what I discovered in writing this book was that everything we think is a political battle is really a spiritual battle, without exception. So we have the first cover of Ms. Magazine having this bloodthirsty, and she's a man-killing goddess. I left that out. She wears a garland of men's heads around her neck. She has a waistband that has men's arms, and she would kill men on the battlefield and drink their blood. And there was a whole cult devoted to her in India for hundreds of years that was one of the most murderous cults of all time. And they would only kill men on her behalf because she didn't want women killed. The only acceptable sacrifice was kill the men.
Right.
Now, this is on the very first cover of the very first mainstream feminist magazine in America, which was marketed to housewives everywhere. Right. And Gloria Steinem becomes the face of Shout Your Abortion. She becomes the face of the women's movement. And her grandmother and mother were both theosophists as well, which I thought was super interesting. So this religious underpinning and the monism is there.
Which
Alice Bailey and the UN, you know, all that stuff. We see this blending into this new age religion, and feminism is deeply, deeply tied in with the new age. 100%. So
I would that monism, again, that perennialism, as you talked about theosophy, with Helena Petrovna Blavatsky founding that tradition. Again, it's all about this sort of perennial basis underlying all the world religions, which really gets going from the Renaissance with the Italian Renaissance in Florence. But that is this privileging of unity over multiplicity. And you see this same thing, that this Western mind has a real problem of holding both things together without privileging one over the other. Of course, Orthodoxy gives us a framework to do that. But you look at Kali, and she's the tantric goddess of southern India, and so it's the left-handed path. And so you look at how all this stuff, the occultism itself, or Satanism, or this is the left-handed path in the Western world. And so we're not in India, so we don't have Kali per se, but Kali is just representing the inverted right. So when you are part of the Kali tantric tradition, you're part of this left-handed path where you do things the opposite of the way that the hegemonic society does it. And that's what gives you your power, is that you're not limited by the confines of traditional society. And so we see the same thing. Then the woman gains her power because she's not limited by the confines of a marriage, the confines of the patriarch, the confines of sexual chastity and purity. All these things are considered limitations. And so this occult spirit, or even this radical feminism, is that left-handed path emerging and perpetuating itself in the Western world, where ultimately what's so ironic is it's actually anti-feminine, but that's really when you go against God. So it's like it ends in a point with men competing with women in sports, right? It ends with a point where the woman is actually displaced from society.
Well, somebody asked me that the other day. They said, well, what do you think about this now? Like, isn't it kind of funny? Isn't it kind of a dunk on feminism that now we have men in women's sports and we have all these male transgenders making all this money in porn? And I said, no, I think it's the logical conclusion. I think it's where it was always headed, really.
Yes.
So just like what the devil does, he sells you something, right? You can be a powerful goddess, you can be a rock star, you know, it's always this promise of power, and it always ends in chains. You never really get the deal you think you're getting. And we had theosophists at the beginning of the century and in the middle of the century saying that this was the inevitable path, that eventually there wouldn't be male and female. In fact, the transcendentalists in the 1800s were saying this as well. They were saying we need to get to a point where there isn't really a male or a female. That's where you get this idea of like two spirit, right? Where it's like everybody's got a blend of feminine and masculine, and you have people like Demi Lovato and other celebrities saying, well, I feel like I'm both, so I'm non-binary, or I feel more masculine, so I'm a man now. And like, you can just pick your energy, you can just pick your gender. And the point is to erase gender. The point is to get to a point where you do blend them together. The lines are all blurred on purpose. They're gone on purpose, which is what you were talking about in your trad forum speech. That the point was to erase all the boundaries. The point is to get rid of all the boundaries and just tell people you can do anything, you can be anything. And I grew up in the 80s and 90s, which was the Go Girl era, where it was like, you can be an astronaut, you can be the president, you can be all these things, as long as you're not a mother. Because if you're a mother, that will get in the way, and that's the most commonly cited reason when you ask a woman like, oh, why did you get an abortion? Well, because I would have never, who was the actress who got up at the Golden Globes? It was Heath Ledger's ex, Michelle something.
I'm not sure.
She got up and gave a speech and accepted her award and said, this could have never happened without my abortion. I would have never had this career. I would have never been able to be the artist I am if I had had a baby holding me back. And so you all need to go get abortions so you can be a Golden Globe winning actress like me. And to me, that's exactly what I would say if I were Satan, because when we read Genesis and the curse, we know, and this is something lost in Protestantism. I didn't know this until I started really studying Orthodoxy and reading Genesis, creation and early man and things like that, and understanding the real story, where we are redeemed via motherhood. Women are. The life of a mother is an ascetic life. And what I say
a self-sacrificial life, which makes you more like Christ by definition.
Exactly. And I think that you cannot achieve that. You cannot get anywhere close to theosis if you are trapped up in this sexual power paradigm of and I tell people this all the time. How long do you think that can last? We just saw Jennifer Lopez's last movie bomb because she's in her 50s. She's like 56 now. Yes, she looks good. Okay. But people still know that 56-year-olds don't have exciting, romantic, they're trying to teach us and trick us into thinking, and women really think this when I talk to them. You can just have babies when you're 40, 50, 60. You can still be just as hot and sexy at 60 as you were at 22. And I'm always trying to tell them, it doesn't matter. You can be the hottest 62-year-old on earth. But you can't compare to a 22-year-old. Ever.
And that's part of the magic, right? That's part of the spell. That's part. So getting the entire society to venerate the beauty of somebody in their, the age 56 is part of, again, the surgeries, the whatever serums they're using on their face to rejuvenate the skin cells.
Fetal cells
exactly.
That have fetal stem cells in them. I mean, it reminds you of witchcraft, right? When they would use the blood of children to try to remain young. I mean, I'm doing a series right now on my Patreon about Disney movies. And the princess theme and the way that they took good fairy tales and then flipped the morality and inverted it and turned it into the Disney princess franchise. And we see that a lot, like the Snow White story, the old witch, needing to be youthful forever.
Hocus Pocus. What's the basis of the Sanderson sisters? They have to sacrifice a virgin child.
Yeah, Rapunzel, it's this old woman witch who has to keep her in a tower and keep her from her prince forever so that she can steal her youth and her beauty away. And it's like, this is what we're seeing. And so now this is the most tragic, practical application of this that I see all the time. And I hate it because I feel like by the time women get my book, they're already in trouble. They're already getting older. They've already screwed up a whole lot, and they're looking for answers and panicking, trying to fix it. And I wish I could get women when they're 16, 17, 18 to read this. And I just tell them, whatever they tell you to do the opposite order. We tell women, go to college first, then build a career, then later, after all that, if you have time, then you can have a family. That's not how things work.
No, and it's the absence of meaning, and which is part of this disenchantment of the world, right? Because the career is actually you participating in what Weber called the rationalization, the secularization, and the bureaucratization of the world.
Yeah.
And so then you're taking your creative force, you're investing into that process.
Right.
And you're not having, so therefore you're in the process of aiding in the disenchantment. Then once you get off work, you go re-enchant the world by sex or magic or drugs or whatever it is, going to the club. This is how then they re-enchant the world.
Yeah. And then by the time you figure out that this is empty and meaningless, you're 40, 45, 50 years old and your childbearing years are gone.
Right.
And there's nothing you can do to get them back. Now, I go over too how a lot of these technocrats want to get rid of childbirthing altogether. They want to get rid of this altogether, have babies born in artificial wombs, things like that. So they want to how else do how do we temper our sexual power? Because I talk to my daughters about this. I say there's nobody more powerful on this earth than an attractive young woman.
Absolutely the truth.
And you'll never be more powerful in your life than you are if you're attractive and 20 years old.
Exactly. It's true.
And so that kind of power combined with that kind of youth is not good for you. You think it is. You think you can get everything you want. You think you can get power, status, money, things, trips, whatever with that. But you're not going to get to God that way. You're not going to experience
You're not going to get meaning. And so blessing in disguise, as you talked about, you were a young mother, well, considerably in today's age at what, you're 20.
I was 20.
20.
Yeah.
So at 20 years old, you become a mother, but that set you on a path then to actually be more invested in a meaningful self-sacrificial life where, again, the hedonism, the pleasure seeking is how the alienation of living in a disenchanted world is how we reanimate it, re-enchant it is through hedonism and pleasure, and that's not going to do it. And I feel bad for all the women because the timelines are very different for men. Men can mess around in their 20s and then emerge at 35 years old with a career and as a somebody, and they can still move on in their life. Women have this biological clock where, again, society, this societal movement, this feminizing movement has taken, again, that harness, that incredible power. A man, to get power, it's like this long process. A woman, if you're born beautiful and you're young, you have innate power that has been given to you. And so they waste that away, and it's sad because now we're seeing the societal consequences of this, even in everywhere. So again, women, through the glory of God, who come back to orthodoxy, you still can't get your time back. You still cannot get your fertility back.
I know. It's super sad. I had an email from a woman who was in her last year of dental school. And she wrote to me because she said, I found Christianity last year. And ever since I became Christian, all I want to do is get married and have a family and be a mom. That's like, I dream about it. I'm obsessed with it. It's what I want, like, so deeply, but my parents will disown me. Like, if I just quit dental school, they'll disown me. And she's like, if I start a dental practice, I'm going to have to work 40, 50, 60-hour weeks to get it up and going. Once I get it up and going, I can't exactly just walk away from it.
Right.
I've got all this student debt. She's like, I don't know what to do. I feel like everyone will think I'm crazy. Everyone will. And I know that she's right because people did this with me.
Absolutely.
My closest friends and family and everybody in my circle just thought I was crazy. For wanting to stay home and be a mom. And even with this Tucker thing, like, it's cool. It was a cool experience, but like, I'm not, rolling in millions of dollars or something. But I've had people say like, oh, so are you going to do this now? Like, you could really like take off and go places. You could really do something with this. Like, you're everywhere now. Are you going to take advantage? I said to somebody in a conversation, like, well, no, I still have 2 kids to homeschool.
Yeah.
I've got at least another 8 years minimum of like full-time mothering ahead of me. I run the household. My husband is the one who has to work 2 jobs. So who's going to do everything around the house and run all the errands and take care of everything, if not me?
Right.
So you want me to hire a nanny and a housekeeper and go leave my kids to have a career telling other women not to do that?
Exactly. They're literally cast.
But they can't. It's like they can't conceive. They're like, well, if I had a shot like that, if I had an opportunity like that, I'd make the most of it.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm like, well, you could offer me $1 million, but I don't get those 8 years with my daughters back.
Exactly.
You can't give those back to me, and $1 million isn't worth it. Yeah. I'm not taking that with me.
But you'll take those memories, and you'll take the effect that you have on your children will last into eternity. That money, that $1 million stays here in this world. And so you see this inability because of the social medias, because of the narcissistic tendencies, which I think is a product, again, of this disenchantment process, people becoming more alienated, therefore they're finding more meaning within their own experience, therefore they're becoming more narcissistic, and social media then exacerbating that, where a woman sees maybe the popularity or the limelight that you're acquiring, and they're like, oh my gosh, I wish I had that, I would do X, Y, Z, I would be all over the place, you know. Yeah. But it's like, but that's exactly, you're literally doing the thing which we're trying to not get women away from.
That's the trap. That's the trap, right?
Right.
It's this illusion that I would be better off if just I had some fame, or if I had some money, or if I had opportunity or respect or whatever it is. And it's like, I'm not exaggerating when I tell people, like, I have a very, very good marriage. A really, like, my husband is my best friend. We are super close.
Amen.
Like, to the annoyance of people around us sometimes.
That's great.
But we're super close.
That's what we all want.
Oh, I wouldn't trade it for anything in the whole world. And same with my kids. It's like, every day I wake up and I'm like, how do I have these amazing people around me? My kids are just, they've turned out so awesome. It blows my mind. Like, I'm like, how did these amazing people come from me? Like, how did this happen? But there's nothing that is worth the trade. There's nothing out there for me that's better than this. Do you know what I mean? There's just, I want to do this purely for the sake of helping other people achieve it, letting other women know, you know, when I was 20 and everybody was telling me I was crazy and stupid for being a stay-at-home mom, I wish there was somebody on Tucker Carlson saying, no, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not crazy. You're not stupid. You're not foolish, and you're not going to regret it. You should make whatever sacrifice you have to make to be a mother, to do that job as well as you can, because you don't get a second chance to do it over. Mm-hmm. And women don't think about the second half of their life. They don't think about what happens after they're 45, right? When you're young and you're fertile, you think it's always going to be like this, that people will always open doors. They will always stop to help. They will always just give you things because you're pretty and because you're a girl, or that the world is just going to always be this way. And when you don't have a family and you're not married and you get into the later half of your life, it's very lonely.
Yes.
Suddenly being a dog mom isn't what it used to be. You know, it's not enough anymore. And
well, reverting to witchcraft would be a way, because again, that's where the archetype of the witch is. It's a woman that's childless, that's older, you know, nearing menopause or post-menopause, where it is incredibly lonely. It's an incredibly lonely life, but it's a life then of power and exerting power. Now we live in that society where, and so I wanted to continue a little bit more. You mentioned the boundary thing and the boundary dissolution, and I think this is a really big point, because if we're in a spiritual warfare, you know, one of the ways in which we organize ourselves is through hierarchies and through boundaries. And I believe that is a masculine process, is the defining of boundaries and not letting boundaries being transgressed. And if they are transgressed, there should be consequences of some sort if they are. And so in a world, just metaphorically speaking, with absolute no boundaries, no national boundaries, no moral boundaries, no gender boundaries, no conceptual boundaries, that nothing then elevates itself, nothing gets off the ground. We're all on equal level, equality.
Yep.
We're all on the same place, walking and butting into each other, but there's no hierarchies that move back towards God. There's no hierarchies that take us off the ground and start to elevate us towards something higher. And so that is a process, that is the patriarch, that is the hierarchy, that is the discipline and the rule structures and the, again, what this feminist spirit that we can trace back to occultism, back to certain forms of witchcraft. It's all sort of tied together in these elements. And so, I use the metaphor that men are the castle walls, and then women and children are the jewels inside the castle. And so the female spirit is one that isn't so linear. It's not as linear as the male energy, right?
Yeah.
In multiple ways. And so because of the linearity, that's why we then define boundaries. We look at our society right now, and it's been incredibly feminized. We look at what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, and we see that they aren't doing the same feminizing practices to their society, making us, so then we see this happening, and everybody who's an American can already feel that you feel differently about the own protectiveness of your own country, because it's going to be penetrated. And I mean, you can think of that in many different ways. And so the sexual metaphor is conducive to the ways in which we can't establish boundaries and uphold them, because within the country, within our morality, within our society, we're already dissolving all those boundaries. So when China or Russia comes knocking on our northern border or southern border, it's already over. We've already lost. We don't have the masculinity to establish and defend ourselves. We're going to be penetrated. We're going to be dominated.
Yeah. And I mean, what you're talking about is kind of like the fractal patterns that we see in creation.
Yeah.
It's typology and the chiasmic structure that we see in the Bible, where it's like what goes on in the home can be extrapolated all the way up to
exactly
nations. So if you grow up in a home like I did, where the father is removed and the mother is like a very Marxist feminist, you grow up in chaos. I grew up in total chaos. And I think a lot of the reason that I'm kind of more of a tomboy and that I'm into this stuff and into this academic stuff is because I was trying to, on my own, until I met my husband, bring some kind of structure, some kind of stability, some kind of sanity into my world, because I didn't have it. It was pure chaos. It was craziness all the time. It was, I still have like a lot of fear of like instability, or fear of like things not being predictable. I think from growing up that way. And I think if you look at what's going on in our society right now with depression, anxiety, everybody being on pills, and the largest group of people who are on psychiatric drugs are boomer aged women. I don't think that's a coincidence at all.
Right.
And it's very strange. There was a paper that came out, I want to say it was 2014, called The Paradox of Female Happiness, where they're finding that women, to the extent we liberate them, are less happy. Even though they've got more money than they've ever had. They control 80-something% of the buying power in this country now. And many women in the next 20 years are expected to inherit a double windfall. So they will probably outlive their husband if they have one and get his money. And they'll also get an inheritance from their parents. Women have an unprecedented amount of power right now.
Right.
They've never had more power, and yet we don't see them being happier. We see higher rates of alcoholism and substance abuse, anxiety, depression, suicide.
Yeah. Well, amongst adolescents, we're actually seeing girls commit more suicide than boys in some instances, which you can point back to the sexual exploitation of this power and girls wanting to participate in this, but they're not going to be able to exert the same power as their friend or another girl in school or the girl on Instagram or whatever it is. And this causes emotional distress. So yeah, it's very, and that's what's so interesting. Then this whole process has nothing to do with the actual empowerment of women or the or the longevity of women.
It's
the happiness of women.
Lie.
Yeah.
That's why the final chapter is called the Faustain bargain, because it's the biggest lie ever told. We're told that this is going to give us power, money. We're going to dominate men. We're going to finally get, whatever it is that we want, even though nobody could ever tell you what that really is. Like, what is it that you want? We don't know. We just want power and control for some reason. And that's not what we get. What we get is there is no woman anymore.
Right.
So decades of feminism, a century now of modern feminism, and the men can just come into the sports and win all the medals.
Yep.
The men can just take hormones and get boobs and lip fillers, and they can make more money on OnlyFans than any of the women can.
Right.
So it's like, even in the adult, the porn industry and things like that, it's like men are taking over that. Men are taking over sports. And it's like, this is the deal you get. When you make a deal with Satan, this is what you get. You don't really ever get the power you think you're going to get. You don't get the glorification. And that's what it is. Like, I made a very controversial post where I said, I don't think there's any reason for us as women to, especially as Christian women, to seek power, whether it's in the church or whether it's political power or power in the home. Because does it help us? We know what things help us in our salvation. If we can love better, if we can serve better, and if we can glorify God better. And women trying to have power over men does none of those things. It prevents all of those things. So you are cutting off your path to theosis. You're cutting off your path to salvation by seeking power, whether it's sexual power, political power. I mean, look at Hillary Clinton.
Right.
Look at Kamala Harris. Look at the women who have the most power. Angela Merkel. They don't look super happy or godly or anything to me. And I think that it's a trick. I think it's a terrible trick. And at the end of my book, the hope, the white pill at the end of the book, there's a famous quote from Simone de Beauvoir when she was doing an interview. Yes. Her and Jean-Paul Sartre, their awful stuff that they were into in France, abolishing the age of consent, and seducing young girls. They were awful. She's in there too. She has a famous quote from an interview she did with Betty Friedan in the 70s where she said, look, I'm paraphrasing a little bit. She said, if you give women the choice to stay home and be wives and mothers, too many of them will make that choice. So we have to take that choice away. And I think that she is right. And that's what I'm counting on. And that's why, even though right now, a lot of people, they see my message or they read my book and they might think I'm a little crazy. I think, and I hope that after I'm gone, my grandkids and my great grandkids, hopefully there will be many, they will look back and say, wow, grandma was onto something, because now maybe it'll break the spell a little bit. Maybe it'll shatter this illusion just enough that women will go, yeah, wait, this is a raw deal. This is a Faustian bargain. This isn't good for me. This isn't really what I want. Like, is it really so awesome to go work for a corporation in an office all day? Is that really better? So the whole goal was to just, if you tell women it's okay to do, I think most of them will do it.
Right.
It's just that now we raise them from birth saying, you can't stay home and be a stay-at-home mom. What are you, a loser? Are you stupid? Are you lazy? You can't hack it in the real world. You got to depend on a man. You got to, you're lazy, so you want to stay at home in your pajamas all day with kids. And I want to flip that script and break this pattern of antinatalism and anti-motherhood and say, no, this is, and the Theotokos is really, I think that's another thing we lost in Protestantism. We don't venerate Mary in Protestantism, and we don't talk about motherhood as this wonderful ascetic gift that helps us in our salvation anymore. We tell everybody to go be sexy and get power.
Yeah, and that this then causes girls to actually like condemn other girls that are pursuing purity. Yeah. And so to speak a little bit then to I agree with you. I think if most girls, women had the opportunity to find a man that they could love, that could be their best friend, but also somebody that they have a deeper connection with, that has the same values, that they would much rather find that situation, have children, build a family, build something together that's going to, extend into time. But part of that also, so then I want to get your take off a girl who's going to be able to acquire that at a younger age needs to also preserve her purity, because if she is, say, 24 or 22 or in her sexual prime, but she's also slept with 10 people already or more than that, I'm just saying that it's going to be harder for her to pair bond. It's going to be, she's going to have a lot of a much different understanding of how to relate to that man. So speak to then, because it seems like I do think most girls would choose that, but then what are the type of girls that would be then chosen by the type of men that would get and offer that to a woman, right? Because it kind of goes both ways. Yeah. You can't, maybe a girl would choose that, but at the same time, you can't be, 34 years old and you've already, you already had your hot girl summer, and now I say, well, now why can't I just get the man to just do all this stuff for me?
Well, it's because everything's been so damaged at this point, right? Women are told you can't trust men. You can't trust them. They'll abuse you. They'll take advantage of you. They're gonna pump you and dump you. They are not trustworthy. They're all terrible. They're all the same, and then women hit 40 and they go, where have all the good men gone? I don't know why they're not around. And then they'll get, I even have talked to a lot of Christian women who are older and unmarried, and they can become very resentful of this.
Right. Because it's a fact, and understandably so. And so we need to also be very compassionate, because we've all made mistakes. It's just really unfortunate for the women, because you have a biological clock. And so, the men, your contemporaries, the people you went to school with, they messed around, did all the same stuff. And it's not fair that now they're 30 something and they're in a totally different situation, because now they make more money and but you're not.
What they don't think of? Do you know what these women don't ever think of?
What?
And this is what I'll ask them to kind of break them out of this pattern of thinking. I'll say, okay, what if I describe to me the perfect man? And they'll say, oh, he has to be kind and funny, and he has to be reliable, and he should love Jesus. And they'll give me all these wonderful things that are part of the guy that they want. And I'll say, okay, I found him. I know a man who has all those qualities, but he's 5'6" and he's bald. Are you interested? And they'll be like, well, I have to be attracted to him. I can't help it that I'm not attracted to guys who are under 6 foot and don't have hair. Yeah. And I'll say, well, in the same way that you have to be attracted to a certain guy and you need a certain type, it's fair then for men to say, I would prefer to not have a woman who's been with a couple dozen guys, who has 2 kids from another man who doesn't take care of them, who I now have to take care of, right, who might hate my guts. And I don't want to risk family court. Right. Look at how badly men get screwed in family court.
Absolutely.
They risk losing half of everything they've ever owned. And all that has to happen is Mrs. Johnson looks at the neighbor and says, the neighbor just makes me feel sexy. He makes me feel so sexy. And so sorry, kids, but dad's out, and the neighbor, Mr. Johnson, is moving in now, and he's mommy's new boyfriend. Women think that that's perfectly reasonable. They go, well, I have to be happy. Don't I have to be happy? And you're like, well, yeah, but what about your husband? And what about those 2 kids that want their dad? Well, sorry, kids, mommy has to be happy. So it's like, let's not purity spiral about men being too picky and men having these impossible standards of purity and things like that, when we think it's perfectly reasonable for women to have impossible physical standards for men, because they do. They do. And to also think that, if they just change their mind, we can break up the family. I'm very much against no-fault divorce, and people attack me for that too. But the church has always had exceptions for things like substance abuse, physical abuse, abandonment. We've always had. It's another myth that you could never get out of an abusive marriage. That's not true. You would go to your priest. The priest would ideally know you and know your family and say, okay, this guy is an abusive alcoholic drunk, and it's far better for the family if we allow this divorce. Now, it's rare. Right. It wasn't supposed to ever be no fault divorce. It was never supposed to just be, well, just I'm not happy anymore. Right. It's like, don't even get me started on how silly that is to just decide you're not happy and break up a whole family, and then the ripple effect that
and that's has. That narcissism, though, that again, that the problem of our society then feeds the own self-gratification. And so and I mentioned this, and this is not to be attacking women or anything like that, because certainly men aren't what they used to be either. So it goes
Sure.
both ways,
Yeah.
right? So men aren't what they used to be. And that's true for all of us. I'm not as good as a mechanic as my dad and my grandfather were. I may read a bunch. So that's true for we all have to be very honest about ourselves. At the same time, we were talking about the female expectations and this inability to self-criticize and the narcissism that, I'm not happy, or, he doesn't make six figures. He's not 6 foot, and, he doesn't have a six pack. So I don't know. I'm really holding out. And so, but it's like, women, there's just this weird schism that then they get married, and you look at the statistics, and it's well over 60%. It's 70 to 80% of all divorces are initiated by women.
Yep,
and then you ask them why, and it's almost always because of happiness, sex, or money.
Yep.
And so it's like these three things, then on all three of those are to some levels a sort of self-gratification. And it's not that they aren't important, because if you have a non-romantic relationship, that's got to be hard. If you have a very unfulfilling relationship.
We're not saying suffer.
Right.
Suffer, woman, just suck it up and suffer. We're not saying that. But what we are saying is, it goes both ways. And I think what were you just saying about
the
criticism. So we have changed things in society now where we tell women that criticism is abuse. If you criticize a woman, you are abusing her. So women now, if a man has a legitimate constructive criticism in a relationship, the woman will say he's abusive. He was, treating me badly and this and that. And men will say, sometimes men ask me, like, what should I look for? Like, how do I know I'm not going to get a woman who seems godly and good and like we can be together forever, and then 10 years down the road she leaves me for the neighbor? I say, if you can find a woman who can take constructive criticism, not abuse, but constructive criticism. Like my husband will say to me sometimes, he'll be like, honey, I can tell right now you're tired and you're being like, you wouldn't be mad about this right now.
Right.
I know you're tired, or, I know you're hungry or whatever it is, or you're upset about something.
She's hangry.
It's so true. It happens. But, he knows enough now where he's like, okay, you wouldn't normally be mad about this. Like either what's really going on or what else has you upset. And sometimes that makes me mad. Sometimes he'll be like, well, how dare you? I am mad about this. And of course, every time he's right. But that's the hardest thing for women. I think it's our biggest barrier in relationships is being able to take any criticism at all, even if it's meant to be constructive and helpful or done with love. If you can find a woman who can take criticism, holy cow, put a ring on it, keep her forever, because I think that's like one of the biggest keys. If you can say to your wife, look, I know this is important to you or whatever, but here's what I need too. Or here's where I don't feel like you're meeting my needs. Right. You almost can't tell a woman that anymore. No. So I think that we have to stop with this princess stuff. I think we have to stop with this idea that men are just waiting to abuse you, and anything they say that makes you feel not like a princess, anything that, in a real marriage, sometimes your husband's going to say something and it's going to be true and it's going to sting a little bit.
Right.
Just like we do with men. It's the same thing.
Exactly.
Sometimes I'll say to Andy, I'll be like, really? Or was your ego getting the best of you there? And you can see his face go, well, I mean, yeah, maybe, maybe that's true. If you can talk to each other like that, you're going to make it.
Right.
If you have this idea that the other person, you're always waiting for the other shoe to drop, and the other person, like, I knew it. I knew you were going to abuse me. I knew you were going to be bad to me. I knew you were going to mistreat me. And you can't take any criticism. You can't be married.
Right.
And we've just taught women that criticism or telling them the truth about anything that they're doing is abuse. Right. So
no, I think that goes both ways, and so and unfortunately, for a large, I think for the incels, for example, in our society, is that historically they would be with a lot of the, now because of propaganda, the blue-haired, maybe overweight leftist girl. It's like so the bottom tier of the sexual hierarchy. normally they would be mating, they would be having children, and this is going to establish this whole dynamic. But the whole base of it is really kind of falling apart. The women aren't interested in the women or the men that is sort of on their level. And so then it's like forced all the women to really want the sort of top 20% of all men. So it's like 80% of women want the same 20% of men. Yep. And it's just this really strange dynamic that has occurred because of all this different pursuit of hedonism, pursuit of power, pursuit of pleasure over everything.
Yeah, and we know where it all comes from. It all originally comes from the father of lies and the person who is the deceiver.
Right.
He's not a liberator, ladies. Okay, right. Lucifer's not the good guy. He's not the liberator. Don't go start doing your period blood, crystal moon rituals, thinking that, that's going to get you where you need to go. Find an Orthodox church, go to a liturgy, and then look for a man who's looking for the same things you are. Look for a man who wants a family. There are so many men who want families. I got them falling out of my pockets. Okay. we have started a few different, Orthodox singles groups.
Oh, great.
Yeah, but the problem is they're like 80% men.
Right.
I went through and counted the other day, and I'm like, we can't get women in here for some reason.
Right.
But in my DMs, they all say they want relationships. They want husbands.
I want to pose something to you then. A lot of the women then, and I would venture to say this is probably even within the orthosphere, is that as you talked about the princess dynamic, the Disney dynamic, the princess almost seems like the natural other side of the coin of the witch, right? So you have the witch, but you look at Snow White, you look at, like you said, Rapunzel, you look at all these different fairy tales of the princess archetype, there's always a witch figure involved. And so the fairy tale princess experience is then preventing the women from finding a decent man to actually build something. Yeah, maybe he's not, the number one thing that you would choose if you could choose all things, but maybe he's so good and a genuine person on the inside that you start to build and you realize that the irreplaceability of them as a person, just theoretically, right. But the princess dynamic has then altered the way that girls go about analyzing men, that if he's not your Prince Charming and therefore he's a 9 out of 10 in every category that you've listed, then you can't settle because you're still waiting on Prince. But that's not how this works. And so it's like they're being affected by the occult roots, the witch roots, the feminine roots of this entire process by them thinking to themselves, well, I'm not a witch. I'm not interested in that. I'm a Christian, but I'm waiting for my Prince Charming. And therefore they're so deluded by the princess framework that they're still they're still recapitulating the same problem, even though they don't see themselves as a witch or a feminist.
Yeah, in the original version of the Little Mermaid fairy tale, the one that's really, really old, Hans Christian Andersen had a version of it, but there's even older versions of it that come from Northern Europe. In the original fairy tale, the mermaid, she did want to become human so that she could, because she fell in love with a human prince, and she wanted the prince. But the prince married someone else because he had a duty to his kingdom to unite with another kingdom. And even though he loved her, he chose loyalty to his family and his kingdom. He said, I'm responsible for my kingdom. I've got to marry this other princess. And the witch gave her the option to kill him and get her mermaid life back. And if she didn't do that, she was going to turn into sea foam and disappear forever and cease to exist. And the witch gave her a dagger with which to kill the sleeping prince and his new bride. And then she could live another 300 years as a mermaid. If not, then you disappear at sunrise. She couldn't do it. She could not bring herself to kill the prince or his bride, and she was ready to sacrifice herself and fade into non-existence just to allow him to live. And because of that, angels basically came and granted her a new life, where if she served humanity for 300 years, she would have an eternal soul.
Wow.
And be able to go to heaven.
That's way better.
Yeah, so the original story was about that ascetic sacrifice that we talk about. It was sacrificing herself. And her original motivation for wanting to go be on Earth was love, and because she knew humans had souls and could go to heaven and mermaids didn't. So those were her two motivations for wanting to become human. In the Disney version, however, Why does Ariel want to go to the surface and be on land? Because she likes the stuff. She's got the treasure trove with all the human treasures.
Oh.
And there's a famous line from the song where she says, "Bet you on land they understand that they don't reprimand their daughters. Bright young women, sick of swimming, ready to stand." She doesn't want to go because she's in love with the prince. She wants to go so that she can get out from under the oppressive thumb of her father and have cool stuff. And like the hot prince is a good, like, you know, little side gig too.
He's a side piece.
Yeah, he's a nice side piece. And then what happens at the end of the Disney version? Ariel's dad comes in, sacrifices himself to try to stop the sea witch. The sea witch turns him into like a little plant thing and takes over the whole kingdom, is going to damn the whole mermaid kingdom. And then Prince Eric has to come and like risk his life to save everybody. And he does. And what does Ariel get? Does she get in trouble? Does Eric go, "Holy crap, that was terrible. I'm not going to marry you because what the hell did you do?" Does her dad say, "I can't believe you endangered the whole kingdom"? No, she gets everything she wants. And her dad apologizes for daring to trample her feminist dream.
Oh my gosh.
That's
I never
the
even
end
thought
of
about
the-
it that way, but
Yeah,
you're so right.
So they took it and just totally inverted it. They turned it from this beautiful tale of self-sacrifice
Right.
and love and turned it into princesses get what they want, and the men are just there to come and save you after you screw everything up,
Right.
even though they told
And there's
you
no
the way you were gonna
consequences.
do.
There's no
Yeah,
consequences.
no consequences, and you get everything you want.
Mm.
You see this pattern starting with The Little Mermaid in 1989, and then every Disney film after that is the same thing. They did it with Beauty and the Beast. They did it with Rapunzel. They did it with Frozen, Mulan, all of them. So I'm starting a series just to kind of show people, like, this is the original fairy tale, which had a moral and usually Christian message to it. And then Disney took it, inverted it, and made it into merchandise and t-shirts and franchises to make a bunch of money and to instill feminist messaging, because that was really popular. Oprah was queen of everything in the 90s, remember?
Yep.
She was pushing all the new age stuff.
Prosperity, Christianity, all
and
that
the
stuff.
prosperity
Law of
gospel,
attraction. The Secret,
Yeah,
that was a
and-
big one. She had a huge impact on the popularization of The Secret.
Yeah. And then she started having the interfaith episodes where she'd bring on all the different
Yep.
interfaith pastors and stuff. And so it was all part of the culture at that time. And so this is the sea that we're swimming in. And that's why I wrote the book, because people don't even know. Like, you just said, "Oh my God, I never thought about that." Until you start seeing it. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Now you'll see it everywhere.
Yeah,
But,
I did not know about the old Little Mermaid fairy tale.
Yeah.
That's really very, very Christian, and I like that
is.
version. It's so much more accurate, again, to as traditional Christians, as Orthodox Christians, to the reality of the situation, that that when you actually participate and do what is right, like, there is no non-existence, that you will always be remembered, right? That to do what's right is to be in the image of God, to participate in those energies, and therefore to live eternally, because those energies themselves are eternal.
Exactly. So there was an old fairy tale theater. You're not old enough to know this. I'm much older than you. But in the early 80s, before the Disney version, there was an HBO or some kind of cable show called Fairy Tale Theater. And they did an episode of the old Little Mermaid, and I was obsessed with it as a kid. I watched it like 100 times. And so when the Disney movie came out, I was like, what'd they do to the Little Mermaid, you know? And I remembered that, like, this year as an adult, and I went, gosh, I should write about that, because I don't think people know there was an original version that was opposite, you know?
Right.
But that's what happens when you're a mother. I had 5 children. 4 of them are still with us. My son has passed on.
Oh,
but
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you. I have 4 daughters, and hopefully, think about this. Let's just say they each, on average, have 3 kids. I'll get 12 grandkids.
Wow.
Let's say that all of my 12 grandkids, on average, have 3 kids. I'll have 36 great that I could leave by being a mom. Now, do you think that would happen if I was working as a corporate lawyer, or as CEO of some company or some startup, or or something glamorous like that. No, they're just going to replace me the next day after I die.
Right.
So
True.
It is about the eternal. It is about really what's gonna be here after you're gone, what you leave in the world as a woman. And you don't, again, it's a Faustian deal. They're stealing that legacy from you by telling you, no, just have dogs and work. Just be a dog mom and have a job.
Right.
You know, you're being robbed of this amazing impact you could have on the world.
Right. And this unique human characteristic, because one of the things that I mentioned about the cat moms and the dog moms is it's equating children to animals, which is actually lowering mankind to the status of animals. And, you know, Darwinian Wallace theory of evolution kind of does that. So this presupposition is that without God, without a transcendental worldview, is that there is no separation between mankind and animality. And so that's why we see then women pursuing this feminist spirit, whether they're conscientious of it or not, and they end up then sublimating that feminine motherly intuition into having a little, you know, a Shih Tzu or something like that, you know, or a cat.
Their baby.
Yeah,
their baby.
And it's what it is it's actually dehumanizing, whether they're conscientious of it or not.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, that's where we got this whole idea of you can get an abortion. It's just a clump of cells. It's just a clump of cells, right? So yeah, the whole theme here with the occult feminism stuff is it robs us of everything meaningful. It robs us of everything that enables us to find a way back to God.
Yep.
And it especially, I mean, by destroying families, by destroying women, by destroying motherhood, I mean, there's no more effective way look at the birth rates right now. We are well below replacement. We're on the verge of population collapse in almost the whole world. The only place where that's not true is parts of Africa. And guess where the Rockefeller Foundation is taking their little Planned Parenthoods and their vaccine, or their V words and all that stuff. They're taking it to Africa, right? Yep. And they're taking it to India, the only places where people are still above replacement levels. And we know about the depopulation agenda, and this is definitely part of it. And it just destroys humanity in general. So yeah, I'm kind of on a mission to to get this out there. I don't hear other women saying what I'm saying. So I guess I have to say it.
No, there's not a whole lot of women that are saying it and actually living it. Because I think one of the things that has been really interesting with, you know, the manosphere, and even my girlfriend showed me some of the YouTube influencers, these women that are teaching women how to be feminine. And yet they'll teach them, you know, to dress elegant or walk a certain way or wear certain heels. But at the same time, it's totally tied then to the career and the money and you know, all this stuff. It's never about, you know, it might be about finding a man, but it's not about the traditional understandings of having a family or having children. And at the same time with the manosphere, then we're seeing all these guys really be exposed as, you know, grifters. You know, one guy got caught masturbating for like a gay porn site.
Jack Murphy.
Yeah, then Jack Murphy, like literally doing, you know, I'm not even going to get into it, but
awful stuff.
Yeah,
really
awful
stuff.
Dehumanizing, certainly anti-masculine things with his wife or girlfriend or whatever she was at the time. But just a lot of stuff going on where it's this is a weird area, right? Because you have all these influencers or wanting to influence of like tell women how to be women and tell men how to be men, and yet at the same time, it's hard to know for people interested in that type of content and need that type of content, who to listen to and where to get that information. And that's why then if you're not in a Christian tradition, if you're not in something like Orthodoxy, you don't have a framework to understand.
There's no anchor.
Yeah, there's no anchor to it. There's no foundation. There's no morality. There's no understanding of purpose. Like as a man, it's like, well, okay, you're not ready. Well, you need to make sure that you have a skill. Can you make money? Can you lead? Are you staying moral? Do you know about God? Because you're going to have to be the spiritual leader. So there's a lot then that men could work on in a constructive way. And it's not, you know, spinning plates, have multiple girlfriends, you know, it's like, no, that's that's not going to help a guy actually become a man to have a long-term relationship. And then you look at a lot of these guys in the manosphere, and they're married or they're divorced, or married and then divorced, and a lot of them are now single. And it's like, well, there's like this spitefulness for men, and there's a spitefulness for women, and then it's like those are the people that are giving everybody advice on relationships.
Yeah, and I mean, this is maybe like a less popular thing for me to say, but I am not a super feminine girl, like in the way that most people mean it. I'm extremely maternal. Like, ask Luke Kendrett. I'm always trying to hug him and like baby him like he's my little baby. I want to mother everybody all the time. If you come to my house, the first thing I'm going to do is try to cook you food and like feed you. Yeah, I'm very maternal, but I'm not feminine in the like graceful, beautiful. Like, I like lifting weights. I like shooting guns.
Amen.
I'm a firearms instructor, you know. And,
okay. Nice.
Yeah, people think that that's like, they're like, wait, those things don't go together. And I'm like, well, being a mother is a really tough job.
Right.
It's maximum responsibility all the time, which is, I think, one of the reasons that it's so easy to talk people out of it, because there is no more responsibility on this planet than being a parent, especially if you have a larger family. And you got to be physically strong, mentally strong, emotionally strong. You're going to encounter tough things as a parent. It's not easy being a mom. Even if you have an ideal situation, it's not always easy. You know, like we lost a child that was hell on earth. We wouldn't have gotten through it without our faith. And we've had one of our kids have a chronic illness that was difficult. There's just hard things you go through. And for me, doing things like going in the gym and like crushing a bunch of weight might sound really masculine, but for me, it's like I can carry my kids out of the house if there's a fire. Right. I can show them how to keep themselves in shape and fit and stay strong. Exactly. I can be around longer for my grandkids because I'm not going to have like no muscle mass and fragile bones. And it takes a lot of
posture,
strength.
like being hunched over. That's, I mean, weightlifting is huge for just being able to maintain posture in old age.
Also, I recommend it to anyone who wants to have multiple babies, because a really common thing that happens after multiple births is you'll have pelvic floor weakness and you can have prolapse and things like that. Nothing will get you a stronger pelvic floor than lots of heavy deadlifting and squatting and things like that. It will keep you. I mean, childbirth is not easy.
Oh, I bet.
And being in good physical condition, knowing your body, being strong, having like mind muscle connection, I think it helps with birth personally. That's sure just my anecdotal evidence.
If you already have a habit of working out too, recovery after birth is going to be that much better too, because your body has memory. And so if you're usually doing these activities for years and then you have a child, well, it's going to be able to bounce back and get back to where you would want it to be much easier if you already have a lifestyle of lifting and lifting weights, being in shape, doing activities.
Yeah, and I'm not saying all women have to do that. If you're not into that, you don't have to do that. I'm just saying, like, just because I'm here talking about femininity doesn't mean you can't be a tomboy, doesn't mean you can't enjoy physical exertion or traditionally male hobbies. It means being a good mother, being a good wife. It's more about service and self-sacrifice and those sort of things. You know, I haven't had a nice new outfit in a long time. I haven't had a pair of designer shoes in my whole life. There's kid clothes to buy, you know what I mean? So it's like, it is a service thing. It is a sacrificial thing. It will make you stronger, and you need to be strong to be the head, the matriarch of a family. And the other thing I got in big trouble for talking about online was I made the mistake. I had a bunch of rapers yelling at me one day and telling me that I should be quiet and get offline, because if I'm really a trad woman, I'd get off the internet. And I said, you know, it's really hard for me to sit here and shill for the patriarchy and tell everybody that we should reinstitute some kind of a patriarchal society if we don't have any patriarchs.
Yeah.
We need patriarchs. We don't need guys who are like, screw girls, they're stupid. I'm going to live in my mom's house and eat chicken tendies.
I know. Well, that's why Nick Fuentes, he blocked me on Twitter because I had a criticism of the Groypers as neotenists. It's a term for the retention of juvenile characteristics into adulthood. And so eating brownies and talking about their chalky milk and their chicken nuggies, to me, I don't find it funny anymore.
No,
I
I
know
don't.
even in some of the orthospheres, guys want to like mock it, like, oh, it's still, it's not funny. I mean,
No.
it's like, it's not like,
No, and my husband that's his main criticism of it too. He's just like, no, no. That's not where it's at, guys. And you shouldn't be pushing that stuff. You shouldn't be trying to make it cool. You shouldn't be trying to make it trendy and cool. And it's like, yeah, so there's criticism for the men too in that way. It's like, if you guys want a patriarchy, if you want us to follow, then you have to lead.
right. You have to be
You
worthy
have
of,
to,
and
yeah.
that's the thing is, men have to demand the respect by actually being those types of men.
Yes. But I will say a flip side to that is if you are young and you're married, women will always say to me, because I'll say, oh, I'm having trouble with my husband. I'll say, well, what's going on? And she'll say, well, he should be doing this. And I think he should be doing that. And he's not doing this that I think he should be doing. And if you're saying that to him, especially if you're saying it in front of people, like that's a big rule for me is never, ever say anything disrespectful or critical in front of people. Men shouldn't do that to women either.
Absolutely. It goes both ways.
But I think women, it's very trendy and cool to basically dunk on your man in front of people. Don't do that, because if you do that, he's never going to do those things that you think he should be doing. And it's not about making him bend to your will, but it's like, if you treat a man with the respect that he deserves, like imagine him as the kind of father and husband and leader that you want, and treat him like that first. It's like he magically becomes that.
Right.
I don't know how that works, but if you just start treating a man like you know he's capable, like he's worthy of respect, like you trust his judgment and his decision making. So when he comes home with the new fishing tackle or whatever, and you're like, I wish you would have spent it on, something in the house that I want. Just don't say that, and just say, good. I'm glad you enjoy fishing. You love fishing. I'm glad that you got some fishing stuff. You know what I mean? If you start doing that, just watch the magic that happens.
Right.
What kind of a man your husband suddenly becomes. He suddenly will like just elevate into the kind of, because he'll be like, oh, look, she trusts me and she respects me. I have to honor that. Like, I want to honor that.
And maybe this is a great point to end the conversation, because that's really the sort of correct use then of that primal sexual power, right? Because again, even within that romantic marriage relationship, you still control access to the sex. And so it's, but now you're that supportive feminine force that is encouraging him, masculinizing him, building up that force. You're not taking it away by making him a simp or losing his credulity and his masculinity in pursuit of that sexual object or whatever it is that's going on in society. So it sounds like this is like the conversation coming full circle to that woman then seeing the potential within a man and really interacting with the person she wants him to become, is how then she takes her power and crafts her partner into the man that she really wants him to be.
Yeah, and that's, if you do that in the correct way through this Christian filter that we have, it elevates both people. That's what my husband and I early in our marriage realized, like, we have to full on take care of each other. Like, I have to put him first in everything before the kids, because if you cannot have a stable family and be a good mother if you're cutting your husband off at the knees, if you're disrespecting dad in front of the kids, if the kids can see division, that doesn't work. If I'm putting him first, and if I'm treating him like he's already this wonderful man I have in my head, and he is, you know what I mean? I married him because I saw that in him.
Right.
But treat him that way. Don't like pick apart the little things and go, well, you could have done this, man, you could have done that.
Nagging.
If you don't do that, and you just really support and praise and already treat him like he's on top of the world, this weird thing happens where he will become that. And then Andy realized, like, if I really take care of her, if I provide that stability that I know that she like needs to, because he'll say, like, if you don't have that, you get crazy. You start acting like a crazy woman. You know what I mean? So he'll provide just like the calm, counterbalance to me, and he'll just make sure that things are stable.
Uh-huh.
And when I'm acting silly or I'm getting emotional or whatever, he'll just be like, honey, I know, that's okay. And do you want to take a nap? Do you want a burger? Like, what's going on? Like, but he's very, he takes care of me first, which makes me feel secure, which enables me to trust him.
Right. Which then it's a feedback loop, because then when you criticize, he's much more willing to hear it. And then he's willing to change.
Because he knows I'm not just waiting for something to pick at. Yeah.
So then it's that feedback loop. Because when it's just one person or a woman just waiting for full gratification, and so the nagging, the picking apart because she doesn't feel that full satisfaction yet, it's not building that feedback loop of trust and then criticism and then protection and providing for, and then that's ultimately what we want.
And in our church, marriage is a sacrament.
Absolutely.
It's a holy mystery.
Yes.
We aid each other in salvation. We aid each other's salvation. So everything you're doing in a marriage, you're either aiding that person and yourself in salvation, or you are pulling yourself further away from it. So to the extent that you criticize, nag, belittle, or treat your spouse poorly, you are pulling them further from salvation along with yourself. It's like, it really is much bigger than just two people having a relationship. And that's why in the West, we've reduced it to, well, we have to be happy. And it's like, no, it's about much more than being happy.
Right.
It's about our very salvation. It's about the foundations of humanity. It's about glorifying God. It's much bigger than two people just having a relationship.
Right.
So,
which ultimately leads to fuller satisfaction and real happiness. But there's things in the hierarchy of values that actually are higher than just pure happiness itself. Yes. So thank you so much. Again, we got some super chats to get into, but anything you want to say before to wrap up the conversation on your book? And again, for everybody, the title of the book, you can hold it up. It's Occult Feminism, The Secret History of Women's Liberation. Again, I've already read it. It's very good. It's a good read. It's an easy, straightforward read. You can just sort of drive right through it. It's chronological in its sort of development. Very nice overview. So anybody who's watching the stream and would like to get a hold of that book, what's the best way for them to try to get a copy?
You can get it on Amazon. It's paperback, hardcover, ebook. There's an audiobook coming next week. And then if you do want a signed copy, you can email me or find me on social media and shoot me a DM, and I can do that too.
Excellent. Well, first super chat comes from Trantrad and throws in $5 and says, "Great stream as usual. Thanks." Thank you, Trantrad. Frankie D throws in a super chat and says, "DPH, hey, this statement is for Rachel. I follow you on Gab under a different pseudonym. Really appreciate your messages. God bless." So Frankie D has a shout out for Rachel. Next one comes from our buddy Pano, and he says, "I'll reiterate my point from the Indiana Forum. Please don't forget to devote yourself to the Mother of God. Open your hearts to her like you would your own mother, because she is your mother. Apart from her, you can't become a Christian or a, quote, trad lady."
Good point.
Thank you very much, Pano, for the super chat. Next one comes from Giro Paulo, and he throws in a super chat saying, "Good to finally catch up on a live stream. Many blessings to you both." Well, thank you so much, Gira Paulo. Really appreciate it, brother. Thank you so much. God bless you and your family. And then next super chat comes from the Pope of Swag. Shout out to the Pope of Swag. Throws in $30 and says, "Great stream. Everyone needs to see this. One of the saddest things is how unhappy a lot of these career women are." Yeah, I would say it's women, just generally speaking, don't have ultimate satisfaction in a career. It's going to be within the family, and it's generally speaking, it's a masculine enterprise to have a legacy that's outside one's family, and it's within some type of skill or career. So next super chat comes from, it's always a great play on words here. It's Goeth, the famous author of Faust, and then it's liturgy, one word. So it's Goeth the liturgy. And he throws in $5 and says, "Truth is stranger and more disgusting than fiction. Lord have mercy." That's probably that was probably due to our conversation on the broomstick.
Yeah, sorry, guys.
Next super chat comes from Thomas Henderson and throws in $10 and says, "Thank you, Rachel Wilson, for bringing this important topic to light. Many of today's contemporary social trends have demonic and dark origins. God bless you and keep fighting the battle."
Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas Henderson, for the support. And definitely keep doing what you're doing. It's certainly having an impact. And just the fact that he got recognized to the point to get on Tucker and promote homeschooling, which, I mean, at this point, if anybody who has half a brain has to be wanting to homeschool, I really don't understand. Unless you've already established traditional values and maybe you have kids that are in high school playing sports or something, I could maybe understand that. But
you can homeschool your kids and still send them to public school sports.
Oh, you can?
States. Yep, because you still pay the taxes and everything. So they can usually do all the extracurriculars. They can do sports, band, choir, the vocational or tech centers and all that stuff. So you should be able to homeschool unless there's a state that's changed a law that I'm not aware of. They can still go to prom. They can still do sports. They can still interact with normie kids, and you can still homeschool them.
Yeah, the normie might be detrimental at this point.
Yeah.
Frankie D throws in another super chat and says, "Another for Rachel. I have noticed the trend for pro-feminist / occultic believers. The ones I have encountered had a negative relationship with masculine figures, particularly the father, even if he was around. Then try to get attention from the wrong dudes." And so then this is continued. "Women unfortunately seem to become more and more detached from reality by reading these You're a Goddess type books that are designed to take a detached mind further from God. It's no wonder so many women are on pills and in therapy. The therapy destroys." So you have anything to say? I guess that was it looked like it continued, but anything to say about the relationship to masculine figures? I know that was brought up in your book.
Yeah, that's super, super common. And a lot of this has to do with, we have 3 or 4 generations now of moms who threw dad out because various reasons. Mom needed to be happy or whatever, but then it's always blamed on the dad. It's always like he didn't make me happy.
Right.
And
he wasn't Prince Charming enough.
Well, and it's crazy because what usually happens, right, is the woman says, "I want stuff. I want money. I want a bigger house. I want to go on vacation. I want a second car." And the guy goes, "Okay, honey, I guess I'll work more and I'll really focus on my career, or I'll get a second job." And then he does that. And then she goes, "Well, now you don't pay enough attention to me. And I feel like I'm lonely and blah, 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 blah. And so I had to have an affair because you weren't fulfilling my emotional needs or whatever." It's just like, this is all a product of us teaching women that they are infallible, that they can't be criticized, that they are goddesses and that they are princesses, and that they should expect to always be happy, right? That there's no sacrifice required on their part. There's no bigger responsibility that they have to future generations. It's all very here and now, and it's very self-centered, and yeah, that leads to a lot of misery. And yeah, women tend to be big into therapy, and I would say, I have done therapy when my son passed away. It wasn't all bad. I'm not saying all therapists are always bad or that all therapy is always bad, but I would say most people should have a spiritual father before they even think about therapy. Do that first. Go to a church, get in a church, get a real spiritual father who you can do confession with, who can talk to you, who can recommend what you should be doing as far as your prayer life and all that other stuff before you think about going to do talk therapy. That's just my suggestion.
Good advice. Frankie D throws in another super chat. Thank you so much, Frankie D. Frankie D says, there is actually a funny website that calculates how delusional a woman is when seeking a partner. It's pretty funny. It takes free attributes, or it takes a few attributes of the guy you want and calculates the probability of them existing. Yeah. Only 20% of men are over 6 feet tall. Wow, I did not realize that.
Yeah. I've seen other things like, I think I've seen that website, and I've seen other things like that, like statistically, and there's one, my friend Aaron Clary does the same thing for women. He is part of the manosphere, but God bless him, he's my friend. He's been very supportive, and he'll do the same thing with women. He'll try to calculate, okay, you want her to have slept with less than 3 people. You want her to have no tattoos. You want her to, like, what is the probability? It's like, 0.005% that you're going to find this person. Right. It's the same thing with men. It's like, I don't know what to say about that. It's like, we can't fix society, I don't think, until we fix motherhood.
Well, and ourselves and our relationship with God. Yeah.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, that's where the ascetic life of motherhood comes from. Mm-hmm. But it's like, if you don't have mothers, nobody has a prayer, and fathers too, of course. But it's like, men in general, I feel like it used to be like, oh, deadbeat dads. But I feel like now I encounter more men who like really want to be fathers, and more women who are like, ew, crotch goblins, no thanks. Like, I can't buy my Birkin bag if I have a bunch of little F trophies running around. The way that people talk about children, the names they'll call them. Oh yeah. Like when I debate feminists, the chat, whoever the feminist person is I'm supporting, the way they talk about children, it's absolutely demonic. And the antinatalism has gotten nuts. And we just gotta stop talking about babies and children,
and the important role for families too, because I've always imagined that to some degree men marry their mothers and women marry their fathers, in the sense, I'm not trying to be Freudian, but in the sense of the values set forth, the qualities, the things in which, like a woman who had a strong, strict, masculine father, she may go out there and have a lot of experiences, but she's never going to settle or respect a man that she doesn't see as on the same level as her father. And the same thing for men, unfortunately, so many young men don't have a fatherly figure, and so all they have is a mom, and then it's, unfortunately, they've been over-nurtured, and they haven't been prepared for reality, which is kind of the role for a father, is to prepare the children for the world. The mother kind of shelters them from the world. Yeah. And so then you just have a bunch of these young groypers that it's like they've just been, they're talking about, milkers and chicken nuggies and all this different. And it's like, how did this happen?
I know. Well, everybody's raised by women now. Public schools, I think north of 90% of the teachers are women. The kids are in daycare all day, surrounded by women. Then they go home to single mom at night. And another thing that I talk about a lot that I don't ever hear other people say is that single moms will program their children to protect their crap choices at all costs. So something I'll see a lot when I talk about this is somebody will be like, well, you can't say that about single moms. They're trying their best, and you don't know their situation. And what if the guy was terrible to them? Or what if the man left? Or what if this? Or what if that? And I'm like, were you raised by a single mom? Well, yeah, but my mother is a saint and it has nothing to do with it. Was your dad around? Well, no, but only because he was terrible and my mom wouldn't let us see him. I see. Yeah. So single moms tend to program children to protect whatever it was that they did, that they never had any responsibility, that the dad was a villain, that society was the villain, anyone but the mom. You cannot, this is a step up from, you can't criticize women, you can't criticize single moms.
Right.
Trust me.
Unless they come to a student or parent-teacher conference, then you can.
Yeah, I guess so.
Next super chat comes. Shout out to Dr. Michael Moeller, one of my good buddies. He throws in $20 and says, "Great conversation, and thank you for your work, Rachel."
Oh, thanks.
So, shout out to Dr. Mo. Again, if you have,
I've seen him on here a few times, and he's really great.
Yeah,
so
well, hey, he's a single, good-looking, successful Orthodox guy. So
yeah,
again,
what the heck? What?
It's hard.
How?
It's hard to meet.
I watched you guys' last conversation, and I think you mentioned he was single, and I was like, why?
How is
this?
It's possible? Rough out here in the streets. It ain't easy.
I know. That's what I hear. I'm glad I'm not out there.
Yeah, definitely. But shout out to Dr. Mo. Love you, buddy. We'll be seeing you next month. I'll be heading out to California, so I'll be seeing you here soon. Thanks for the super chat, brother. God bless you. I'm sure we'll be talking soon. Hope all is well. Next super chat comes from John Pro. Shout out to John Pro and our Orthodox iconographer in our community. God bless John Pro and all his work. He said, I missed this one, but I'm going to give it a listen as I make my way to Colorado. Well, shout out to John Pro. And he got out of the Bay Area. He's been crowdfunding to try to move from the Bay Area to Colorado to a Orthodox community out there. So shout out to him. Thank you so much, John, for a $10 super chat on your way to Colorado, brother. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's awesome. They was able to get out of Satan's playpen over there in the Bay Area. I was there in Berkeley, so I know what it's like. It's not fun.
Yikes.
Next super chat is from Frankie D. Again, Frankie D. Thank you, brother. My gosh. Tons of these $5. He is a big fan of yours. When it comes to the Groypers, I think there is some role to play for the fool, the jester archetype, like Paggio says, to flip this inverted world topside up again. In this clown world, becoming the clown has some utility. Anything you want to say off that?
I mean, I think that's always going to be there. I don't even think there's a problem necessarily with, Nick and what he wants to do,
right.
except that he portrays himself as the leader of the movement that's going to save this country.
Right. And the lack of,
if he were saying, look, I'm just an entertainer, right. I'm just an entertainer, I'm just up here, making everybody laugh, but he's not. He's trying to portray himself as a serious leader of the only right-wing political movement that can save us all. That's kind of where, and I was very supportive of Nick, like a year or two ago. I was pretty supportive of him until I got into the inner circle a little more with some of these certain characters that he surrounds himself with, and I started to go, oh, this isn't good, so
right.
I pray for him. I hope that he does come around. He's talked to Luke Kendrat before and said he might look into orthodoxy. I pray that he does that, and that
I hope that he does too, because it's certainly a little bit more masculine than the current Catholic Church. No shots fired. Nothing too egregious there, but it's there's something. And again, I can get behind Nick's America First message. I think generally he has fairly accurate takes on certain topics, but there's just something strange about the whole Groyper and the neoteny and it's this very childish. So I kind of disagree with Frankie D in the sense I don't see them as jester figures. I don't see them as the clown. I don't see them as the trickster figure. I don't see them as the Wile E. Coyote. I don't know exactly what to put my finger on it. It feels like Nick's a very articulate and sharp dude. There's just something very neotenous. There's something off. There's like the video games and the chicken nuggies and the McDonald's food and
making inceldom cool. Like, oh, I'm a real incel and that whole thing. And at first I thought that was jokes too. But and maybe for Nick personally, maybe it is, but when you get into this community and start talking to people, there are people within it who are very angry.
Clearly, yeah.
So it's like, that's not good. That's going to poison you too. So
yeah. Well, again,
I wish him all the best.
Yeah, I do too. God bless him. I hope he does well. I hope he finally gets a girlfriend or a wife. That seems a little bit worrisome. I mean, it seems like he's got enough money and enough opportunity that not sure what's going on there. But yeah, God bless the Groypers and all our Catholics and Protestants. Hopefully they all become Orthodox. But if they don't, God bless them, and I hope they still make it to the kingdom. So I have no hard feelings. They're just, I think as a movement to try to save America, it's going to need to be a little bit more masculine than some of the things that they do or portray publicly. But, who am I? That's just my own 2 cents.
Yep.
So next super chat comes from Serena. Serena throws in $15. Thank you very much, Serena. She says, great stream. Got your book, Rachel, and can't wait to dive in. I'm a stay-at-home mom myself, and I'm trying to live more of an ortho lifestyle, starting with my role as a wife. It was a struggle at first, but the struggle wasn't without reward.
Yes. Yes. So good to hear. I love hearing that. And she's right about that. It's not, look, I'm not saying do this because it's the easiest path.
Right.
I'm saying it's the best path. It's the most rewarding path. It's the most meaningful path. So I'm super glad to hear that. Thank you so much for buying the book. I totally appreciate all the support. I get a lot of hate. So when I do get support, it's very much appreciated, you guys. It really, really helps me when, when the mob comes for me time and again. So
absolutely. And again, tell everybody where they can buy your book.
Yep, Amazon. And then if you can find me on any of my social medias and shoot me a DM if you do want a signed copy, I will sign one and ship one out to you if you prefer that. But Amazon's fine too. Excellent.
And it looks like our last super chat. Oh, no, we got another one. So then Casey Bear 7. So another female watcher. Shout out to Casey Bear 7. Thank you very much for the $5 super chat. They say, great stream. I'm in full agreement. So again, you're having a good impact, a good message for young women. Thank you very much, Casey Bear 7, for the super chat. And this looks like to be the last super chat. Comes from Black Ortho Acolyte. Thank you very much, Black Ortho Acolyte. He's been a continual supporter of the stream. And he says, great stream-based homeschool mom in DPH. Inshallah, all the ortho bros find themselves a based homeschool mom tier wife to raise the next generation. God bless our Orthodox moms.
Wonderful. I love him. He's great. I know who he is. He's a wonderful guy. So thank you. Thank you, friend.
Thank you, Black Ortho Acolyte, brother. I really appreciate all your super chats, all your support. Really, really do. And then again, totally resonate that the next generation, whether we're in the end times or not, obviously despair is a sin. We need to find women, and we need to become men that are going to be able to raise strong Christian children to endure whatever is going to come, because whatever soul inhabits those bodies that we give birth to and raise, that's God's providence, and that's our duty to steer those lives and move those in the right direction. And if they're going to be the ones in the end times, or their children are, not having them is worse than having them and having to deal with the way that the world is.
Yep, and I can tell you, my oldest is 21 years old next month.
Wow.
So I know. So I am now I'm in this far enough, because when they're all little, you do go through phases where you're like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? This is a lot. But when they start to grow up, it's like you get to this wonderful phase where you can finally see. It's a lot like bodybuilding. It's like you finally see all the hard work starting to pay off, and you can see it, coming into shape. And it's like, wow, when you hit that point as a parent, it's just so rewarding, and it's worth everything. Like, I mean, even having a son for 10 years and then losing him, I would never take that back. I would never not go through that in order to avoid the pain, if you know what I mean. Right. So to me, it's completely worth it, and it's more meaningful than anything. And it's like, nobody can ever take that away from you. And I just really, really encourage people, if you're scared, if you had a bad childhood, if your parents were divorced, if you've had bad experiences, pray about it. Don't give up, stay in it and keep going. And it's hard for everybody, but like one of the super chats said, it's very rewarding if you stick it out, just like anything in life,
Right.
So go make families, go forth and multiply like the Lord commanded us to. He did not say be a dog mom, so don't do that.
Absolutely. And Frankie D throws in one more last super chat and says, Rachel is based in the truest sense. You catch a lot of flack because you are hitting targets. Again, God bless you.
Thanks, Frankie. I appreciate the encouragement.
Frankie D.
I really do. I appreciate everybody. Like, when I did go on Tucker, I got so many messages. And then under the YouTube video that they posted for Fox, it was like hundreds of comments of women saying, I've been wanting to homeschool. I've been wanting to stay home. And now I feel like I'm ready to do it. Just because they saw someone on TV say, you can do this. Like that's all it takes to break the spell and to break this programming that we've all been under.
It is just a spell. It is, and that's as Christians, and I'm getting a new icon. It's on my way. Shout out to Father Turbo. He recommended Saint Cyprian and Justina. He's the great magician, convert to Orthodoxy of Antioch. And but it's like as Christians, we break these magical spells through truth, right? Both of them are based on language. The spell is a linguistic ritual phenomenon mimicking and distorting the word of God. And then we can break it by aligning ourselves with the will of God and speaking truth exoterically. And so this is the spiritual war that we engage in. It's really through our tongue. This is our sword. This is the way we battle. And some of us may have to pick up a sword. Certainly Christ did say that he told people to, but just speaking truth is really how we counteract a lot of these magical spells.
Yeah. Feminism is a spell and it can be broken. There's hope. I know it's rough out there, but guys, there's really hope. And I've seen this message help people. And I just want it to be much bigger than me. It's not about me at all. I don't want to be famous. I don't want any of that stuff. I just want good, happy, healthy, functional families and good childhoods for children more than anything. If I can help anybody do that, my life will have been worth anything I've been through. And I've already done that with my own family, but I want that for other people. So don't give up, get out there, get married, have a family. It's the best.
Amen to that. And we got one more super chat thrown in here by Blake Cosmos. Throws in $10 and says, because this is exactly the kind of programming we need. Well, thank you so much, Blake Cosmos. I'm glad that you appreciated our stream tonight. Rachel, this has been great. I think this has been a really insightful talk. We were all over the place. Ancient period, witchcraft, goddesses, Diana, contemporary period, 19th century occultism revival, the First Great Awakening. So we're all over the place tonight. I think what you're doing is incredible. It's a voice out in the wilderness of today's society that needs to try to be heard. And so, thank you for what you're doing. I'm sure you're going to continue to have an incredible impact on young women. And men for that matter. There, a lot of the men, even in the super chats tonight in the comments, just hearing you say a lot of this stuff gives them hope, because if you're out here saying it, maybe that's going to affect a woman, and maybe it just makes them consciously, there's plenty of good women out there. There's plenty of good men. I think people just get locked into these mental feedback loops where they become very doubtful of their opportunity and their providence. But that's really, if you're single out there, pray to Saint Xenia, pray to the Holy Theotokos, and ask for God's will to be done, because it's through God's providence that you're ultimately going to find the partner that you really want. Yeah. And so then it becomes a spiritual matter of, are you going to accept God's will or not when that person comes? Or are you going to be too narcissistic or too interested in the codification of your own desires, where you actually turn your back on a blessing that God's trying to extend to you? So thanks for everything you're doing. Again, tell everybody where you can be reached. Again, maybe one more time, where they can buy your book, how they can get a hold of you, just everything you want to leave with people.
If you can find me on any of my socials, I have a link tree on there that has a link to my book, my Patreon, my Substack, all the stuff that I do. I do some debates over on The Crucible, which is my husband's show. So if you do want to see me go toe-to-toe with some crazy feminists and make them cry, you can catch that over there. Otherwise, it's Rach for Patriarchy on Gab, I think, and then Rachel for Patriarchy with the number 4 on Twitter.
And just send me all your links so I can put them in the video description. Didn't even think about that before we started, but so all these links will be in the video description right after this video gets posted after this live stream. So send me all those links. Shout out to the Crucible and having a debate sphere over there. So, anything else you want to say before hopping off here?
Nope, just thank you so much for having me. I've been super excited to come on your show. Like, I was way more excited about this than Tucker. I knew that we were going to have a way. I just knew that you and I would have a really good conversation about it, and that we could really get into some of this stuff in a way that I mean, who else could I have this conversation with besides you, really? So I've been super excited about it. Thank you so much for allowing me to come on and get this message out there and encourage women to be moms, and that this feminism stuff does not come from anything good. So,
amen to that. Well, thank you for everything you're doing. And I'm humbled. And I think this was a great conversation. It's going to be very beneficial for a lot of people. So just keep on keeping on. We'll definitely have to do another one soon. There's a lot more regarding this topic we could have got into. So maybe next time, families, homeschooling, and maybe how that relates to this stuff would be a fertile topic to dive into.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. I would love to come back. So thank you again for having me.
Of course. Well, with that being said, guys, make sure you smash that like. And I will try to be back either Sunday or Monday with another stream. So make sure you follow Rachel with all the links that'll be posted in the video description here in just a moment. And until next